Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the July 8th regular meeting of Council. I'd like to first recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Sheila Goury. The question period sign-up sheet is on the partition wall near the gallery. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item only, would you please write down your name on the agenda and the agenda item. At the start of question period, I will call up those who've signed up to the podium to address Council. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items, Ms. Goury, and we do have some tonight.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. For late items this evening, agenda item 7A, the Sorority Member of Parliament and Member Council, we're removing them from the agenda. They were unable to make it. For agenda item 10E, rezoning application number RA427 for 4061 Norwell Drive, we're adding a delegation from Keir McPherson. Oops. And we're also replacing option 2 of that report to read as printed on your addendums. And that's it, Your Worship.
Very good, thank you. A motion for approval of the agenda as amended. Moved Councillor Hemmens, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. A motion for the adoption of the minutes is circulated. Moved Councillor Hemmens, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries. I have a few items tonight under the Mayor's report. The firstly, that I'm happy to announce that the City of Nanaimo has partnered with the District of Lantzville, City of Parksville, the Town of Qualicum Beach, and the Regional District of Nanaimo to undertake a study of childcare needs in our communities. The key points are that we're partnering with these local governments to receive a $125,000 childcare planning grant from the Union of BC Municipalities. This project will create a strategic, coordinated approach to increasing access to affordable and appropriate childcare through the creation of new childcare spaces. The local study is part of the Community Childcare Planning Program, which is funding studies across the province as part of a $3 million partnership between the Province of British Columbia and the Union of BC Municipalities. The second item is to call for applications to the Board of Variance. We're currently recruiting one member for the Board of Variance for a 3-year term. It's an independent body established under the Local Government Act, consists of 5 members appointed by City Council. Interested applicants must submit a completed application form to Legislative Services by 4:30 p.m. on Friday, July the 12th. And I would encourage anyone who has an interest in civic government who has an opportunity to serve in the Board of Variance. And for more information, you can download the application form from the city's website at www.nanaimo.ca under your government/boards and committees. And the third item, never pleasant, but a good reminder for those who are listening. Municipal property taxes across the province were due by July the 2nd. Penalties are applied to all non-compliant taxpayers after July the 2nd, which in the City of Nanaimo is 5%. An additional 5% on the balance owed will be applied if taxes aren't paid by August the 8th. So I encourage everyone who can to pay their taxes. Chief Wise of the Snuneymuxw First Nation and I will be interviewed on Shaw Cable regarding the recent signing of our protocol agreement with Snuneymuxw First Nation and Nanaimo, and that's on Wednesday, July the 10th at 5:30. And that's in furtherance of our restored relationship with Snuneymuxw and an opportunity for us to talk about that. And finally, I want to talk about the recent reorganization of city staff. And announce on behalf of Council that we've unanimously endorsed the rollout of a new organizational structure for the City of Nanaimo presented to Council by our CEO, Mr. Rudolph. Initial changes to the organizational restructure were implemented last week with the plan to be completed as positions are filled. This new structure will help realign some sections within city departments to better deliver on Council's strategic plan, as well as shore up areas that were depleted by management cuts over the last number of years. Some of the adjustments to the structure return us to a model that is fairly familiar to local government, with general managers overseeing large business units while also being responsible for ensuring that the strategic direction of those departments is in line with Council's vision. Council fully supports Mr. Rudolph in this change to the organization structure, and we are confident that will allow him and his staff to properly manage the needs of our growing city, of which we are very proud and about which we're going to receive some good news tonight from Mr. Lindsay as well. I'd ask Mr. Rudolph to say a few words, please.
Sure. Thank you, Your Worship. If I could ask that the screen put up the org structure. So as Council is aware, and this will be hard to read, but just trust me, the boxes have important information in them. And this will all be on our website and certainly available. And it's part of the reason for announcing this, I guess, tonight is to make sure that the public is as clear as possible where to go to receive services in which department. So a little background to this. Over the past several months, as you know, with the new council, and there's been a very big focus on governance, and a lot of things have happened with council around the subject of governance, the mechanism of our meetings, the topics of our meetings, the development of a strategic plan, and all that type of thing. Simultaneously with that, there's been an undertaking to review and understand the needs and situation of all departments in the organization, which I have been participating in, and with the assistance of others to do that assessment. As a result of that, we are announcing and implemented as of last week an organizational realignment that positions this organization to support the needs of the community and council for the ongoing period of time. So this is what you're seeing on the screen is a very at the top of the organizational structure, the major departments. And it's not something that's too dissimilar to versions of that you would see in most cities, nor is it dissimilar to versions of the org structure that you would have seen in this city in previous times. However, during the course of a number of years, there were a number of positions eliminated. And as a result of that, some of those changes, many modifications to the org structure took place, and some sub-departments were moved into other departments and so on, just to cover the bases, where resources provided sufficient depth to keep the lights on, is what staff say. So this is what I would characterize as a very normal-looking organizational structure with normal nomenclature or normal wording in terms of position descriptions. It really hasn't resulted in a great transformation of promotions or that type of thing, but the relabeling to put us back into a place that if anybody ever does apply for this organization from outside, they will have a very clear understanding, and there will be people, I think they'll be rushing to come here at some point in time, very clear how we operate and how we are organized and structured. This is not rocket science, but it is very fundamental, and it's important for good governance. Below all of these topics and headings would be additional, obviously, lots of staff that are needed to keep the arenas going and the pools operating and the parks operating and all the transportation and infrastructure requirements and all the things that we see and use all the time and know. So I could comment on the specifics. I would invite those that are particularly interested in the org structure to perhaps either contact us or go into the website and understand how, as we unpack this and present it. But the major departments are continue to be the Engineering and Public Works Department, the Parks, Recreation, and now Culture Department, the Development Services Department, which are the big three departments, and the fourth collection of internal departments, which will be called Corporate Services and will be subject to the recruitment of a general manager later this year. So there are a number of new positions that will need to be filled as time goes on. This is a rebuilding time for us. Council has been very supportive in understanding that in order to meet all the expectations of the citizenry, and there seem to be a lot, because there's a regular plethora of emails coming to the mayor and council asking for more and more services or that type of thing, that we need to resource ourselves correctly to be able to effectively and efficiently deliver those services. So I think with this, this reorganization, we're positioning ourselves, I'm quite confident to deliver on those services that the citizens of the community are expecting. So I'm just going to leave it at that. There's no sense in unpacking all the details of this, but the framework and the context of this reorg is important. It's all part of good governance. It sets the stage for the future and tells us that we are a high-performing organization, and we're attempting to deliver on all the expectations and needs of council and the community.
Thank you very much to you, Mr. Rudolph, and to staff who worked with you in getting this together, and thank you to all of staff, high or low, salaried or union, in this organization, who I trust will support this to ensure that we continue to do a good job for the people of Nanaimo. So thank you very much. That concludes my report. The next item is presentations, and delighted to welcome Superintendent Chief Cameron Miller, Nanaimo Detachment, regarding annual policing priorities. Superintendent Miller, good evening.
Evening, Your Worship. For the record and for the camera, my name is Cameron Miller. I'm the officer in charge of Nanaimo RCMP, and this will be a presentation on some policing priorities I will recommend for council for this upcoming year. I'd like to start off by saying that this presentation is unclassified. This presentation to the Nanaimo City Council recommend annual policing priorities for 2019-2020. The agenda of my presentation, I'll cover off what our current file count is, traffic statistics, how our priorities are considered, and our recommended priorities for council to consider for 2019 and 2020. We start by looking at our file count for this year compared to last year, from the January 1st to January 20 time period. We see that in 2018 we had 22,041 files. The same time period this year we have 23,400. It's approximately 1,400 more files year over year. Looks like we're taking about 4,000 files per month in the Nanaimo RCMP. So you're seeing an increase of 6% of file load year over year, which is not equivalent to our gain in population within the community. I want to take a look at our traffic statistics and our violations year to date. We've issued 1,600 traffic tickets and a number of other traffic tickets, bylaw tickets, seatbelt violations, electronic device violations, talking on your cell phones. One I'd like to draw your attention is the bottom there, 35 excessive speeding tickets. That means somebody's traveling 45 kilometers over the posted limit within the community of Nanaimo, and 35 times my officers. And that's just gone up because, today on Nickel Street, we pulled somebody over going 55 kilometers over the speed limit, and that's on Nickel Street. That comes with an automatic 7-day impound for the vehicle. So a lot of speeding going on here, and education is working, but we need more enforcement. Year to date, I want to look at our impaired violations. So we have 36 suspensions of 24 hours by alcohol or drug. We have 7 3-day immediate roadside prohibitions, 1 7-day immediate roadside prohibition, and 73 90-day immediate roadside prohibitions or refusals to provide a breath sample, for a total of 117 alcohol or drug-related investigations in the first 5 months of this year. That is an alarming statistic to me as your police chief. It's an alarming statistic to the community. That means you've got at least as many people that we've caught. I don't know how many more are out there. One other statistic that I'd like to bring that I don't have written down on my chart is fatality motor vehicle accidents. In the last 12 months, Nanaimo has had 14 fatal motor vehicle accidents. That means that 14 people have been killed on the roads within our communities. Education and enforcement are two ways to bring that down. We're working hard on the enforcement piece. We're working with our partners, ICBC, on the education piece. I'd like to talk about how we select our community priorities for recommendation to council. The first thing I look at as your police chief is the RCMP's national strategic priorities. The RCMP has 5 strategic priorities nationally. The first one is serious and organized crime. You think about gang violence, you think about human trafficking, you think about drug dealers and money laundering. That's organized crime and serious crime affecting the communities and safeties of everywhere we live within this country. Second strategic priority of the RCMP is national security. We all know that we live in a post-9/11 environment, and security of the country is important. We hear reports on various news outlets that different sovereign nations are trying to influence and control elections and governments of other nations. That's something that our Canadian Security Intelligence and the RCMP take very seriously, and we're working hard to make sure that Canada is a safe place. The third strategic priority of the RCMP is youth. That has been a strategic priority of all police chiefs since the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police was founded in 1905. And as far as I'm concerned, will probably always be a strategic priority. The Indigenous communities that we live with and work with are a strategic priority of the RCMP, and when we consider the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women's report, it's very easy to see why that is a strategic priority of the National Police Force of Canada. The last strategic priority of the RCMP is economic integrity. We have businesses in the country that need to survive, and they can't be victims of fraud, they can't be victims of market manipulation. To have a secure economy, we need to make sure that we have economic integrity within our country. That's at a national level. We looked down at our priorities within the city of Nanaimo that the council last year selected, and there were 5 priorities that they chose. First one being violence in the relationship, crime reduction, road safety, youth, and community engagement. And I should point out, for the record, that these 5 priorities are not in any specific order. They are 5 priorities that the council deemed worthy of making the priorities for policing for 2018 and 19. In no specific order, the RCMP was tasked to operationalize these to help make the community safer. Another way we look at our priorities and how to get them is stakeholder engagements. Personally, myself and my staff have had discussions with mayor and council, with our First Nations communities, different community groups, government and NGOs, and internally, because the men and the women who police Nanaimo 24/7, 365 are on the street every day seeing trends change. And I speak to them and I get information input from them on what they think the latest trends are and where we should maybe recommend priorities for council. When I think all that stuff together and I put my package together, I'd like to recommend council consider the following 5 items in not specific order for the 2019 and 2020 priorities. Road safety, crime reduction, violence in the relationships, mental health, Indigenous policing services. These 5 priorities that I'm recommending to council are a living document. Should council see during the year that something else has become a bigger priority, this list can be changed. This is not fixated, and these priorities, once again, are not in a specific order. In summary, it's my recommendation that council identify the City of Nanaimo's 2019-2020 policing priorities. Once City Council and Mayor have selected the priorities, I, as a police chief, along with my staff, will operationalize them through initiatives which will address the areas of concern brought forward by council and the community, which will help to ensure a safer community. My ongoing dialogue with yourself, Your Worship, the council, our First Nations members, as well as the community, government agencies, and NGOs, and every partner within the city and stakeholders will ensure the priorities of the community continue to reflect the current needs of Nanaimo to help make Nanaimo the safest community in this country, which is the mission statement of the Nanaimo RCMP. At this time, I'd be pleased to take any questions, Your Worship, you may have for council.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Miller. Questions for Superintendent Miller? Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you very much.
Pardon me.
That's okay.
No, Councillor. No, we're going to do this correctly. I should have looked at the screen. Councillor Thorpe is first, then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's not often I'm quicker than Councillor Armstrong, but I'm pleased to go first and to be the first to thank Superintendent Miller for being here this evening and giving us this update and suggested priorities. I'm really pleased to see, and I'm sure many of our viewers will be pleased to see, crime reduction on there. It's an ongoing concern. I want to applaud the efforts of you and your members with the crime reduction unit that you put in place last March, and I know it had some noticeable results. It's an ongoing challenge, obviously. My question, Superintendent Miller, to you is basically, aside from extra human resources, is there anything beyond that that council can do to support you, or that the general public can do to support your efforts to make our community safer and a better place to live?
Thank you very much, Councillor Thorpe, through Your Worship. A couple of things I can see the community as a whole doing. One of the easiest things is to help form a block watch or a community consultative group. We've had a record number of block watches and CCGs formed in the past year, and anybody in the community who wants to form a block watch or a community consultative group simply has to contact the Nanaimo RCMP We'll put them in touch with our coordinator and our volunteer coordinator. We'll set up a meeting and tell them how they can do that. What happens is in a community and a street where we have a block watch, we have many people watching out for each other. And a lot of times in a city, we find that people are busy, they're with work, with their kids, and they don't get out to meet their neighbors. But when we have a meeting like this, everybody comes, and maybe they get to see each other for the first time, and they have the same shared goals. They exchange phone numbers, and they start to talk maybe more than over the fence, and they start to watch at each other's houses. When something goes strange, call the police. We see the signs in the airport, see something, say something. We're encouraging people to call us if they see something out of the normal, and Blockwatch helps to initialize that. Another way that council might be able to help the RCMP is space needs. The RCMP detachment has grown a lot, the size of the strength, but the building physically hasn't grown. And if there's any chance for extra space or extra building, we could use that just to spread out and maybe work in a more comfortable environment that we can help doing that. It's a couple of things I could think of, Your Worship.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, through you to Superintendent Miller. I appreciate your detachment lack of space. That was identified as a priority in 2009 by previous council, so 10 years later, and it's still an issue. One of my questions is revolving the Jordan decision. If that has had a huge impact on the number of the revolving doors at the justice system, with many of our repeat offenders not having to face charges because of that decision.
Councillor Armstrong, through Your Worship, so the Jordan decision, for those who don't know, is that people must be brought to trial within a reasonable amount of time. That has not had a major effect or any effect really on the Nanaimo RCMP. We work closely with Crown Counsel as one of our key partners, bringing our paperwork forward. We make sure that we get our charges in on time, our reports to Crown Counsel in. Once the charges are laid, the information is sworn. The court process, we're getting everybody in, meeting our Jordan deadlines. I do know that some of the federal sections are having a little bit more of a challenge with that and some of the bigger cases. But even some of our major cases within the Nanaimo RCMP, we work very closely with Crown Counsel. Some of the homicides we've had recently, we've worked closely to make sure that everything goes in on time and we respect our deadlines for Jordan.
Thank you.
Very good. Superintendent Miller, thank you very much.
Thank you, Your
Appreciate your
Worship.
attendance tonight. The next is a presentation from Mr. Lindsay, who I can address publicly for the first time officially as the General Manager, Development Services.
Thank you, Worship. Good evening, Worshiping Council. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you this evening. You may recall that I'm typically in front of you kind of late January, early February with a comprehensive overview of what we've seen the year prior. We'll be doing that, of course, again at the end of the year. This year, we wanted to come in kind of midpoint of the year and give you an update on kind of the activity that we're seeing around the community. And I want to be clear that we're going to focus tonight primarily on building permit stats. So normally when I'm in front of you in January or February, I'll be talking about rezonings and development permits, and I will touch a little bit on those tonight, but largely just concentrating on building permits and the building permit activity that we've seen around the community. And Your Worship, just for a little bit of context before I start, last year we saw $216 million of construction value in the city of Nanaimo over the entire year, so $216 million. And anything over $200 million has historically been a fairly strong year for the community. In fact, last year was the 5th year in a row that we were over 200. So 5 pretty strong years of growth and investment in our community. And last year that $216 million included 947 new residential units in the community. So that's just some context for the entire year. Up until 2019, 2007 was our biggest year ever in terms of construction value, where we had about $242 million. So that gives you some idea of what we've seen historically. And as I mentioned, that was up until 2019. So, Your Worship, the first slide I have this evening is looking at the residential construction value that we've seen in the first 6 months. And to be clear, this is compared against the first 6 months of the previous years that are contained on the slides. So we have about just under $230 million worth of construction just in residential. These are building permits that have been issued in the first 6 months. And you can see on the slide, the average that we would see normally is about $65 million. So considerably above the average that we would have seen over the last decade. And you look at total construction value, when we bring in commercial, industrial, and all types of buildings, that number actually increases to just over $300 million. So $306 million in the first 6 months of the year. And as you can see, there's a substantial increase over what we've seen here in the community in the past. The other stat that I often report to council on is our single family. We get a question of how many single family homes are being built in the city. And we're actually seeing a slight decrease in the first 6 months with 116 new housing starts, just below that average of the last 10 years, which is around 140 new units. Your Worship, that was a decrease in single family, but when you look at our overall residential number, you see quite a large spike. So we're sitting at 1298, so just under 1,300 new units that we have issued permits for in the first half of 2019. Now, Your Worship, I need to be clear that when we put our stats together, we include all types of residential units, including short-term accommodations, so that includes hotels. And I'm going to go into this in a little bit further detail, but there was approximately 300 hotel rooms that were issued permits in the first half of the year. So if you exclude those 300 hotels, we're still sitting at about 1,000 new units in the community. I'm going to walk quickly through some of the building permits that have been issued in the first 6 months. I need to be clear, these are not all of the building permits. These are just some of the larger building permits that have been issued. And I'll go quickly unless council has any questions. So in the downtown here, and these are just in the order of date that they were issued. So early in January, we had a 45-unit hotel building permit that was issued, and it's now well under construction on Selby Street. Metro Drive, we have the second of 2 buildings for purpose-built rental building. This one's for 32 units. If people have been by the site, the first unit is completely framed up, and the second building is now well under construction. So this is bringing some new residential into the heart of Woodgrove Town Center, an area where we've never had residential before. So exciting project. We're looking forward to its completion. 2020 Estevan, a 78-unit mix of market and non-market housing. About half of the units in here are scheduled to be or are slated to be for non-market rental, and there's also space in here for a new church. And Your Worship, I should have mentioned on the last slide, part of that is funded through BC Housing, as is this project on 20 Prideaux Street. So 57 units that is being targeted for seniors affordable housing. Another project in our downtown. A commercial project, so this is Dodds Furniture in the North End on Uplands, another building well under construction. 100 Gordon Street, so the property sitting behind us, the building permit was issued in February 20th, so that's a 9-story building, 172 units, again, a hotel project in the downtown core. Before I get asked the question, I don't have the date of when they hope to break ground. Our discussions as recently as this afternoon with the applicants was that they're still working out some details, and they were hoping to be later this summer. I'm nervous about saying next month because I feel like I've been saying that to council for a while, but I'm hopeful that in the near future we'll see some activity on that site. All indications are that they believe strongly in the project and are looking forward to commencing. Another hotel project that was issued in February, as you can see here at 89 units, this is right on Front Street. So if you're keeping track, that's 3 hotel projects in the downtown core, which received building permits in the first half of the year. Another purpose-built rental project. In fact, I only included one image here, but there's actually 2 buildings that look exactly the same, so buildings B and C. Building A is a building that's well under construction. If you go by the site, this is the property out behind Michael's. It's the very last property before you leave the city of Nanaimo towards Lanцeville. Ultimately, there'll be 3 buildings here. The next 2 phases, as you can see on the slide, are 49 and 51 units. Again, bringing some residential construction to an area of the community where there's services, but where we've never been able to successfully integrate residential in the past. A medical office building near the hospital. It's in addition to providing medical space for specialists, it also has a parkade. You can just make out in the image, there's a parkade to the rear of that office, and that just broken ground as last time I went by, and I know they're now under construction. 20 Barsby, a project in our downtown, 90 units, and this is for Strata multifamily in the downtown core. Has this 77 Chapel, a building permit issued in April for 110. This is a 24-story project, as noted on the slide, mixed use. It has both stacked townhomes and point tower, a very significant investment into our downtown. And into our South End neighborhood also is experiencing some activity. We have a project at Halliburton Street where the building permit's been issued in April, and I believe that site is also under construction. housing project down Uplands Drive, and I've included this one as it's 28 units, but it is a project that was also funded by BC Housing. So you can see there, Your Worship, and I'll go through the summary at the end, but there's a number of projects here where we're seeing investment from the province to bring affordable housing into the community. An industrial project out in Green Rock on Boxwood. Council may remember this one, as I believe the development permit was issued earlier this year, but the building permit has now been issued in early June, and we're looking forward to that project. Another major investment here by BC Housing, and includes the project at 10 Buttertub, so 159 units of seniors housing. I do not believe that they've started construction yet, although I do know there was a previous building on the site which has been removed, and I know they're quickly moving towards site construction. We have smaller projects, including additions at the Nanaimo Regional General Hospital, and a building permit that was issued near the end of June for a project on 3rd Street. So, Your Worship, later on this evening, you have a development permit on your agenda, which is right opposite of this project on the opposite side of the street. And together, this project, which is now has a building permit, and the project you're going to see this evening, is really going to change that gateway as people move from the sports district down 3rd Street and into our downtown. So, a new gateway to our community, and this building, which is mixed use, as noted, with 22 units, is certainly part of that new gateway. Your Worship, as I mentioned off the top, there's just under 1,300 new units that were included in those permits that I just went over. I mentioned earlier about 306 of those were hotels, but I did want to note that about 282 of those units are subsidized units from BC Housing, so affordable housing units coming into the community. 132 are for purpose-built rental, and 116 of those are detached. I should have mentioned earlier when I was showing the slide on detached, in 116 single-family homes, but I would note that about 80 of those actually have secondary suites. So that's an additional 80 purpose-built rental units, non-subsidized, coming into the community at the same time. And 80 might not sound a lot, but if you think about historically, a 35 or 40 unit apartment building is what we would have seen in the past. That's the equivalent of 2 apartment buildings being added to the other projects that we've seen here. Your Worship, I just want to take another brief second and go through, I've talked to you about the major permits that have been issued in the first 6 months, and I just want to give you a heads up on the permits that we have received and we expect to move forward with here in the next few weeks or few months. These include a project that also has BC Housing funding on Rose Hill for 21 units of housing. There's a project for a mixture of market and non-market rental on Pride Avenue, 48 units. And another addition at the Nanaimo Regional General Hospital, and I'm sorry, there's a typo here, it says 4 stories, it's a 1-story building. And in downtown, this is an exciting project for us. This is modular construction, the first of its type in Nanaimo on Robson Street. So if people aren't familiar with Robson Street, that's kind of in behind the keg in the downtown, so very close to City Hall. So 31 new units in the downtown core. Major building permit, and this one also may look familiar for council, as some of these you've issued development permits for recently, but a building permit's now been applied for this project on Uplands Drive, an additional 251 units of purpose-built rental. And on this slide, Your Worship, I think it might have been just last council meeting you approved the development permit here, and we now have building permits in for the first main building and the second building, the amenity building. So 48 new units in that project that are now coming in under permit. Your Worship, sorry, it may be hard to see at home, but on the slide, the green dots are the major building permits that have been issued, and the red stars are building permits that have been submitted. And the reason I wanted them attached here is if you overlay, in this case I've overlaid the mobility hubs, and this comes out of your transportation plan, but we could have taken similar polygons out of the official community plan in terms of your town centers. But both your official community plan, your transportation plan, your climate action plan, they all encourage development and infill in and around these centers. And you can see that the vast majority of these projects are all in and around our major mobility hubs. And in fact, if you look specifically just at the downtown, a significant number of projects, which equate to about $134 million worth of construction. So not quite half, but very close to half of all of the construction value we're seeing in the community is occurring in your downtown core. Your Worship, just a couple of last, I said I was going to focus largely on building permits, but I would note in the first 6 months of this year, Council's approved development permits with a total of 981 additional units. 574 of those are for purpose-built rental. But we're seeing about 58%, just under 60% of all the units coming before Council are for purpose-built rental, which continues the trend we've seen in the last couple of years. After a period of 3 or 4 decades where we didn't see any purpose-built rental, we're definitely seeing that pendulum shift. So again, those are development permits issued in the first 6 months, which we expect many of those to translate to building permits in the coming months. So, Your Worship, unless there's any further questions, that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. Any questions for Mr. Lindsay? Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Mr. Lindsay. So the total value you gave on, in terms of building, included both of these, both building permits that have been issued and the ones that have just been applied for?
Sorry, Your Worship, that's a good question. I should clarify. No, those are only building permits that have been issued in the first 6 months. So $300 million. So all those other projects that I have mentioned, once the permits are issued, we'll add those totals in. And when I'm reporting to you at the end of the year, I'll include those numbers.
Do you have any idea of why so many people and companies are willing to invest in our city? I know it's a lovely city and I enjoy living here, but why is it such a large spike at this time? And are you seeing similar spikes in other cities throughout BC?
I was going to say, it's the new council, Bonner.
Oh, I didn't want to start with that.
I guess that would be my easy answer. I think, Your Worship, I think it's actually a combination of a number of factors. I think it's the market responding to need. As I mentioned earlier, we went literally decades without any real investment in purpose-built residential. So there's kind of a perfect scenario exists with everything from interest rates to all those factors that impact investment. But I think you're seeing a lot of investment in purpose-built rentals simply responding to the very low vacancy rate that the community continues to experience. I think it's that. I think it's a combination of, likewise, the hotel. There hasn't been any major investments in hotels, and we know that we're lacking hotel rooms here in the community. So that's responding to a market need. So I think there's a number of factors, including, our proximity to Vancouver, housing prices in Vancouver, and the overflow impact that it's having on those periphery cities like Nanaimo.
Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you for your report. Well, it's always nice to see growth. I do have some concerns, and that's on the impact it has on our hospital as well as our schooling and stuff. When we're doing this, are we taking that into consideration in meeting with those affected parties such as NRGH and School District 68? Because it's great to have this, and then all of a sudden we have schools that can't take in the number of new kids. We already have a hospital that's over capacity, and then to add this many more residents is always a concern for me because it's still going to come out of the same taxpayer pocket.
Mm-hmm. Your Worship, certainly we're about to embark on our official community plan review, and it's through those processes that we do formal engagement with those organizations. So looking at sort of our population projections over the next 25 years so that they can also do their planning accordingly. I would say, though, that earlier this year I did actually present to the school board and show them the trends that we're seeing, where in the community we're seeing development, so that the board themselves received a very similar presentation, I think, what council did in February. So they also are informed about areas of the community, the types of housing we're seeing. So.
Great, thank you. I think that's important.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. Very much appreciated. The next is a presentation from Brad Wood, Assistant Fire Chief, regarding the City of Nanaimo Community Wildfire Protection Plan. I know this is, notwithstanding the dampening effect of the last few days, something that's on the minds of many people, including a former mayor, so delighted to welcome you here to address this issue. Chief Fry, you're going to introduce Brad, Mr. Wood? Very good.
Through your worship, yes, thank you. I'm very pleased to introduce Assistant Chief Brad Wood. He is responsible for our community protection wildfire plan that we have embarked on within the city of Nanaimo. As many of you have noted and probably have heard, the risk of wildfire is large throughout our entire province. And we have seen about a 100% increase in bushfires already this year over the same time period last year. Many in our local parks and wildland areas, and even in our meridians and areas like that. So this is a really important program that we're running. For us, it's about the environment and protecting our environment and protecting our community. So with that, I'd really like to congratulate Assistant Chief Wood on the work that he's been doing, engaging our community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and Councillors. As Chief Fry said, my name is Brad Wood, and I am the Assistant Chief of Ops and manage the Wildland Urban Interface portfolio. As we all know, our changing climate has increased the overall risk in the city over the past decade. We're experiencing longer, drier, and hotter periods of weather, as we just witnessed in June there, an extremely warm June. Not so much now, it's cooled down a bit, but June was kind of the norm now. So as you notice on our CWPP, it actually says 2016 on it. The initial process was started in 2016. Much of the legwork was done by the end of 2016. It went through numerous review processes, et cetera, back and forth. So we finally come to a formal plan late 2018. So I'm just here tonight to provide you a brief overview of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. So executive summary, so just some background. So the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, CWPP for short, process was created in British Columbia as a response to the devastating 2003 wildfires in Kelowna and more recently up in Fort McMurray. Strategic Wildfire Prevention Initiative is managed and funded through the Union of the British Columbia Municipalities. Our CWPP aims to develop strategic recommendations to assist in improving safety and to reduce the risk of damage to property from wildfires. This 2016 CWPP reflects a snapshot of the city of Nanaimo threat using the current provincial standard methodology and baseline data for hazard and threat analysis. And just as note, very little has changed since 2016 in the city. You know, we probably, if anything, we've lost a little bit of forested areas due to development. So executive summary, so the plan, the 2016 assessed the current wildfire risk and threat in the city. It examined current prevention and programs and identified opportunities for improvement and future initiatives. So some of the goals and objectives. First one, improve safety and reduce the risk of wildfire in the city of Nanaimo. Assess the updated threat of wildfire in the Wildland Urban Interface area since the last CWPP, which was done 2013, by the way. Identify changes in the community profile, the Wildland Urban Interface, fuel and fire management since the 2013 CWPP. And it identify and prioritize areas for a variety of strategic fuel management treatment activities. And just to note, the study did encompass the entire city of Nanaimo, but for the threat assessment, that's only on publicly owned land. The guidelines don't provide for threat assessment on private land, so. So results of the fire behavior threat assessment. So overall for the city of Nanaimo, the Wildland Urban Interface, WUI for short, threat assessment demonstrates the vast majority of the study area was rated as fire behavior threat classes very low and low. So the city was rated very low to low, with pockets of moderate. These classes are described as very low is described as water bodies that do not have any forest or grassland fuels and cannot pose a wildland threat. Low is described as developed and undeveloped land that will not support significant wildfire spread. And moderate is classified as developed and undeveloped land that will support only surface fires. Homes and structures can be threatened. So overall, So examples of some moderate areas, Lindley Valley, the Harewood Plains, that's up McEwen, Centenary Drive area, all the real grassy, tall grassy areas. And various pockets throughout the city is shown on the map. Anything in yellow is moderate hazard, and there is a couple pockets of high hazard as well. Even though the city is not under great threat from continuous crown fire, that's where it jumps from crown tree to tree to tree, but it is at risk of surface fires. In addition, this finding does not eliminate the possibility for crown fire behavior within the city, as one must keep in mind that all vegetation is flammable and can be erratic under extreme conditions, which we do experience from time to time, very extreme conditions. That's high temperature, low humidity, steep slope, and high winds, which we do once in a while. We get all those contributing factors happening at once. So these are the extreme conditions that we don't want to see. So approximately 99% of the historical fire ignitions have been caused by humans in the city. Get very few lightning strikes causing fires here. So the importance of fire education, regulation, and prevention were really emphasized in this CWPP. So some of the key recommendations from the CWPP, fuel treatment, so there's grass, slash, and forest fuel management where possible. Education and prevention, this is big. So education, I'll back up a little bit. Education prevention to promote the 7 Fire Smart principles. So there's 7 Fire Smart principles that we want to promote and that BC Wildfire is promoting as well. So these are education, vegetation management, emergency planning, cross-training, interagency cooperation, legislation and planning, and development considerations. So some of the areas involved in these in education, so it's about raising awareness and understanding of the Fire Smart program. It's big all across Canada and gaining more momentum every year. It's what residents can do to help themselves, their own property, etc. Vegetation management, same thing, that's practice Fire Smart landscaping as per Fire Smart principles. Emergency planning and response plan to wildfires. As of note, wildfire is already in our HRVA. Cross-training, training with other municipal and wildland departments. Interagency cooperation, that's working together and building strong partnerships, i.e. with BC Wildfire, which we do communicate with quite often. Legislation and planning, review current legislation and understand land use planning. And development considerations. Fire Smart principles need to be reflected in design, construction, and maintenance of communities in the interface area. Continue with that. So communication prevention. So neighborhood associations, we need to get out there and attend meetings and provide support for neighborhood associations. Social media, let the public know where these hazards are, what they can do about it, etc. Let them know when these high hazard times and extreme weather conditions are happening and what they can do to help themselves. Participate in regional fire management group. Signage at fire stations was another recommendation. And apply for additional funding through the Community Resilience Fund, which used to be Fire Smart, it's now changed to CRI. So some of the examples under communication prevention, community chipper program for hazardous fuels cleanup, as residents are no longer allowed to burn unless they have the over the acre in certain months. What do they do with the debris? So community chipper is one program recommended. Share the CWPP with residents, which we will be posting just after tonight. It'll be on our website, City of Nanaimo's website, as well with links to Fire Smart and the British Columbia Wildfire Service. We're currently a member of the South Island Fire Management Organization. So just in closing, just some progress on key recommendations. So the City of Nanaimo, once our CWP was done, we were immediately recognized as a Fire Smart community through Fire Smart Canada. With regards to Fire Smart, I've gone out and presented to various community groups in the city, starting with ones in the high hazard areas. I've given them the Fire Smart presentation, provided information, education to them, and support them in any means moving forward with Fire Smarting their neighborhoods. We've hosted 3 Fire Smart weekends already, and one's been at VIU, 2 at VIU, and 1 on Long Lake Heights, where we provide support for them and materials, and the residents themselves get out and do the basic fire smarting of their properties, etc. We have applied for Fire Smart grants in the last couple of years. It's now changed to the Community Resilient Investment Fund, which we'll be applying for in November. We've recently training 3 people as community champions on Protection Island. So what they're pretty much gonna take over my role on the island, and they'll start running their own Fire Smart program and getting the island up to protection-wise. We do work with parks in the high hazard periods of the time with patrolling, providing education to people in the parks and through the city, hand out literature, and just kind of more or less get out there, show them. People come up, ask questions. We try to tell them what's going on with the wildfire hazard, et cetera, et cetera. It seems to be very well accepted. And as well, I'm available to answer questions anytime from the public. They can just contact me at the fire department. Any questions?
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, through you to the Assistant Chief. One of the issues that happened last year when we had the fires out at Extension, there was a lot of people that didn't know their secondary route accesses or any of that, didn't know where to turn. Is that now on your website so people know where to go and what to do in case of fires in those areas?
I guess, sorry, through your worship to Councillor Armstrong. I guess that would be part of through the HRVA. There's nothing through the fire department that actually shows escape routes, et cetera, for that. And I believe the fire you're talking about was outside the city last year?
Yeah, but we were getting lots of emails from
Yeah.
citizens concerned that if it moved in, how do they get out? Where do they go? They didn't know where to muster. They didn't know any of that stuff. So it goes back to when you were talking about emergency planning, if that was taken into consideration where the muster stations are?
Chief
Through your worship to Councillor Armstrong. So that was a regional district of Nanaimo emergency management program. And that would, and I do recognize that there was some confusion as to evacuation routes and where people were staying. So again, the city of Nanaimo will assist them as needed on communicating, because a lot of people come into our community looking for assistance in the future. But you are right. I think there was a bit of confusion there last year.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Assistant Chief Wood. You mentioned the wildland interface, and some of the problems with fires in other places is either the pines or the spruces are quite flammable, especially when they get dry. And with climate change happening and our cedars are starting to die and dry up, do you think or has it ever been considered the possibility of creating a buffer between the city and the wildland of basically taking down a whole bunch of conifers and planting deciduous trees? And as part of that, also Broome, as we were out on when we wound up the Forks Dam, was told to us as one of the main igniters of the forest fire that took place last year, because Broome grows very hot, very intense. So would it be a recommendation possibly that we also look at trying to get more control over the broom that's in this area?
Through your worship to Councillor Bonner. First question with the Fire Smart. I guess to provide a barrier around the city it would be quite the task. But with Fire Smart, what we do, we rely on the residents to protect their own properties themselves. So if they can provide in their property a defensible space where right up against their house, where even if fire did creep along the ground, it would get to that spot and stop. You know, if we're not going to prevent fire from happening, but if we can get it to stop and slow down and just kind of smolder away in the ground up, then we're fine. Then that gives us time to mitigate it. There are other communities in the States I know that actually provide that you must have a defensible space around your property. So with our risk being very low to low, and we don't have those fuels as you had spoken about, you know, the pines and et cetera, I guess our hazard is a little less, but like you say, we do rely upon residents to protect themselves initially. As far with the broom, I had conversations with broom busters this year, and it is, once it gets dry, it is very flammable. Broom can be part of the fuel management strategy, so when we apply for some funding, if we receive some funding, we'll definitely look at the areas that contain broom that are near maybe infrastructure, hazardous areas, et cetera, to remediate it. So,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you very much, Assistant Chief. Very
Thank
much
you.
appreciated.
Councillor.
I note we have no delegations. We do have a number of consent items. If we could have a motion for adoption of the consent items.
So moved.
Moved, Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Bonner. Councillor Brown.
I'm just wondering if we should move up 9B1 through the grant for the Mid-Island Youth and Community Development Co-op.
We certainly can. So, Ms. Gurry?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the process, if it needs to be discussed or somebody would like to remove it for a reason of conflict of interest, perhaps, then it would be dealt with after the remaining consent items. So you would vote on the remaining, and then you could remove that one.
All right, we can move. The motion then is all items save B3. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Gesselbrock.
I'll remove myself, conflict of interest with that item that we removed out.
Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. The consent item to 9B3. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. If someone wants to bring Councillor Gesselbrock back in. The next item are reports, management terms and conditions of employment bylaw revision. Mr. Van Horn, good evening.
Thank you very much for having me here tonight. I'm here to present for council a revised version of the Management Terms and Conditions of Employment bylaw, currently bylaw 7000. The bylaw provides the terms and conditions for the city's excluded staff, so those who aren't members of either our QP or IAFF bargaining units. There's about roughly 65 such individuals. For the bylaw review, we engaged two outside professionals to assist in developing the terms and conditions and the whole sort of total compensation package for exempt staff, of which the bylaw is part. The first was our employment lawyer that we had do a review of the entire bylaw, but the focus was really on developing clearer terms and conditions. Some of you may know that language in bylaws, if open to multiple interpretations, can then lead to multiple disputes. And so we obviously wanted to have it as clear and tight language as possible. And we paid particular attention to the language that sort of deals with beginning and ending the employment relationship, where we felt it was going to generally get the most scrutiny. We also employed a compensation consultant to review the other terms and conditions to make sure that the total compensation package was not out of line with our municipal comparator group. And so we had that work done right around late 2018 and have been just working through implementing the various recommendations from that. The end product of the revised bylaw, we had an alternative to do an amending bylaw and keep bylaw 7000, but that would have been quite a lengthy process. So with tremendous support from the Legislative Services Department, we actually provided a new bylaw 7273, and we're hoping that the end product will assist us in keeping the people that we currently have here and in attracting the people we need here going forward for the city. And one final point on it is we did make sure when we were going through this, there were some core service review recommendations or elements that touched on particularly with respect to banking vacation and looking at another method for dealing with establishing wages for exempt staff. Currently in the existing bylaw reference the Hay method, and so we've addressed both those things through the revised bylaw as well. So if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Horn. Councillor Turley.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Van Horn. The question I have is with regard to attachment B, item number 6, and that's the termination of employment beyond probation period. And the questions I have is, I understand the termination is given by the directors or the CAO, as in number 6.1, and then in 6.2, notice and pay in lieu of, reasonable in accordance with common law. The one that I'm struggling with is 6.4, where it states that the council may, in its absolute discretion, grant additional pay in lieu of notice to any officer or excluded employee. And I guess my question is, I thought that our only employee of the council was the CEO and that we wouldn't be involved in discussions with other employees? Did I misunderstood that?
Through the chair, officers, those who are designated as officers under our delegation bylaw, I believe it's 7031, officers of the organization can only be terminated on a vote of council. So while the CAO may be your only employee, there are other people who are designated as officers who have additional enhanced protections under the delegation bylaw, such that their termination would come about usually as a result of a recommendation from the CAO to terminate that council would then vote on.
Thank you.
Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you. I'd like to make the first motion. I move that management terms and conditions of employment bylaw 2019, number 7273, to establish the terms and conditions of employment for officers and excluded employees of the city pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you. I move that management terms and conditions of employment bylaw 2019, number 7273, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you. I move that management terms and conditions of employment bylaw 2019, number 7273, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is subdivision control bylaw 1989, number 3260, proposed amendments to the Manual of Engineering Standards and Specifications. It's just a report. Mr. Sims, good evening.
Thank you, Your Worship. One of the more exciting reports that you have in front of you this evening.
Mr.
But
Sims,
I would like
everything
to.
you do for the city is exciting.
This one is interesting. It is an information report, and it follows a normal process of that's set out by policy that have to do with changes impacting development. So the city's Manual of Engineering Standards and Specifications are an appendix to the subdivision control bylaw, which is why we bring this in front of council. So the process includes a 60-day notice period and so on and so forth. Changes affecting development can only happen a couple of times a year on May the 1st or November the 1st. So the report you have tonight is just giving council notice and the public notice that we will be bringing forward a bylaw at the next meeting to change the engineering standards. In this particular one, we're doing some relatively minor changes. These include some adjustments to section 2 and 3, which really are should be in construction contract type language. The other one that we're dealing with is changes to roadway lighting to convert to LED signals, or pardon me, streetlights, as well as changing over to aluminum wiring for our streetlights, and the need for that is wire theft, and so that makes it, aluminum wiring is less attractive. In the near future, concurrently we're working on the next revision, which is May the 1st, and we're in quite a public consultation around that right now, and it'll be a little more in depth on our streets, like our complete street standards will be incorporated in that one. That's it, Your Worship. Any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sims. Any questions? Thank you, much appreciated. The next item is 25 Victoria Road Co-Management Agreement Disposition. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. As Council is likely aware, in 2014, the city signed a license with the Harbour City Theatre Alliance Society. That 5-year agreement is now expired, and staff are recommending that we proceed with a 10-year co-management agreement under Council's policy of 10-year agreements for facilities such as the facility at 25 Victoria Road.
Thank you very much. Anyone care to make the recommended motion? Councillor Hemmens, seconded Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm very much in support of this. I was when we started this process originally, but I do have a couple of questions. It's mostly to look at protecting the public as well as promoting the arts. In subleasing, do we have any control over if the society decided to sublease the entire building and then just walk away from it? Do we have any control over that?
Sorry, Your Worship, I believe that's included in the written agreement attached as attachment A, but I'd have to read through quickly before I could respond to that question, sorry. I'd have to follow up.
I think it fair to say, by way of a free legal opinion, that the holder of the head lease, so to speak, will be responsible for anything below them, including a sublessor, so that their liability would not be absolved unless it was agreed to by the city itself. That's the general principle, unless the agreement provides otherwise, and I don't think it does. But I'll give Mr. Lindsay and Mr. Lindsay.
Your Worship, that would be standard language in all of our agreements, yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think that answers the question. The other question I had is regarding rental rates. The society, and I'm only asking questions because I want to make sure that there's a protection for the public as well as these questions. I don't have a problem with the people who are going to be the Harvest City Theatre or anything like that. But what control do we have over the rental rates that the society charges to other renters of the building? Is that specifically their domain, or do we have any say in that?
Your Worship, the agreement clearly leaves that with the society to determine the rates, but they are also receive any of the revenues off a rental under this agreement.
Do we have any way of getting reports from the society on how they're doing? I think that I remember reading somewhere that a report would be coming they would send us their AGMs and that sort of thing. Would it be standard or possible to include what the rental rates are for the building when that comes down?
Your Worship, is certainly an option that we could invite them to come to council and give you an update on their program and success, whether that's annually or biannually through the terms of the agreement. Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Lindsay. I have actually two questions. The first one following along with Councillor Bonner's question, and that is, do we ever get usage stats on how often, how many days of the week, nights, et cetera, that the facility is actually used?
Your Worship, I know some of those stats were provided when we were going into the contemplation of the extension of this agreement. And if council's interest is to receive those more regularly, we can certainly make sure those are provided.
Okay. And my second question is a little more specific. Under Article 9 in the agreement, item J, where it says the society will not bring on or use or spray pesticides of any description. My question is, how do we deal with, or how do they deal with things like carpenter ants and termites? I know it's probably stupid to ask that, but could be real.
Yes, Your Worship, I think the key of that clause is spraying of anything which may lead to the contamination. So if there's a question, they would deal with our property managers as to the substance to make sure there was no long-term impacts.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do note that some members of the public have expressed concern around this property, given the cost of the city over time, Mr. Lindsay, and I'm just wondering, in terms of the annual operating grant, in the staff report, it talks about the city's investment facility to date is $857,000, nearly $858,000, purchase and maintenance. The estimated capital cost, the upkeep of the theatre building over the next 20 years are anticipated to be approximately $684,000. Are we getting a decent bang for the taxpayer's buck here, so to speak?
Your Worship, I think that depends on how you would measure that. I think The intent of the council of the day was to buy this to show an opportunity to invest in arts and culture and to bring activity back into the downtown. So if you use those as measuring sticks, I'd say yes. If you're strictly looking at it as a for-profit business, I think the answer would likely be no.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you. In asking to your question, I looked at it when this thing came down, was that there's no way that this city could build a theater for that price. So I think it's a good deal, and it's certainly helping out the arts community by providing another venue. Yes, it was a lot of money, and we're probably going to put a lot more money, but it will be nowhere near if we were to build a building from scratch. Thank you.
No further questions? The motion, Councillor Hemmens?
Your worship, the motion has
Pardon
been...
me, it's already done?
Yeah,
Yes, we are, sorry. All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carries. Thank you. The next is development permit application number DP 1126-560 3rd Street. Mr. Lindsay?
Thank you, Your Worship. This development permit at 560 3rd Street, this is the application that I was referring to earlier this evening in my presentation. So it's a development on the north side of 3rd Street, opposite of the project that I shared with you earlier. So this development permit, if approved, will include 181 residential units and including some commercial space within the project. There are variances to the application, and they're outlined in staff's report, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hemmens?
I move the recommendation.
Seconded. Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Your Worship. And it's just a question regarding the shared parking. I was wondering if you could explain how those percentages work, because it wasn't quite catching it.
Thank you, Your Worship. Under the relatively new parking bylaw that the city adopted last year, there is an ability to reduce on-site parking where there is shared parking. So where there's blended parking between primarily residential and commercial, with the theory, anyways, being that those uses have different peak demands. Residential more in the evenings and the mornings, where commercial's more during the day. And by doing those blended rates, you don't tend to oversupply parking on the site. The bylaw itself talks about making sure that there's commercial on the site that's between 25 and 75% of the site in order to qualify. This project, as it's currently proposed, does not have that much, does not have enough to meet that requirement. It currently, as configured, has about 4% of the site as commercial. That could be adapted over time. But however, given the location on the site on a major corridor, its proximity to transit and the downtown and VIU, staff are recommending that the blended rate be expanded to include this project.
Councillor Armstrong?
My concern still remains that parking will be used by the university. Is there any, if that does happen, will we be looking at it so that it can be reserved for residents and I guess customers of the businesses? I know that's already a huge area up in that, or a huge problem in that area, that just about all the parking, any place there is used by students going to VIU.
Your Worship, a couple of comments, and certainly the parking on site will be the responsibility of the property owner, and like any other property, they would restrict it for their tenants. I would assume that they would enforce anybody parking, whether it was university students or others parking on that property. They would take enforcement action. The other thing I would note, and you've seen it on the new project on the south side of 3rd Street, where we're actually incorporating on-street parking into an area of the community that never previously had on-street parking. So there'll be, in addition to the off-street or on-site parking, there will be new on-street parking within this corridor.
Just for clarification, how many are on-street parking? I couldn't find that, versus surface parking. Because there's only 22 underground spots and the rest is surface.
There's 188 stalls on the site, as you mentioned, 22 below the building, 166 at grade. I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head how many are potential in the street.
So the 166, those should belong to the building, not to the street? So we're not providing parking on street for residents?
So 188 are all on the site, 188, so they'll all be available for residents or,
That's
in
fine,
theory,
thank you. That
people
clarifies
attending
it.
the business.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is rezoning application number RA 427-4061 Norwell Drive. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Worship. An additional rezoning application for a site-specific amendment for a cannabis retail store. In this case, when staff reviewed it against the existing council's existing policies, we found that using the spatial separation between stores, it's less than 200 meters, and as a result, staff are recommending that the application be denied.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. I understand we have a delegation. Kiera McPherson. Mr. McPherson, come forward to the mic. If you haven't done this before, you have 5 minutes. I'm going to pop the mic on when you're ready to start. At 4 minutes, the light will come orange and you'll have a minute left.
Thank you, Worship.
Okay? Thank you. If you could introduce yourself and give your address, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. Members of Council, my name is Kiera McPherson. I reside at 6210 Sunshine Coast Highway in Sechelt. I'm just going to read from a prepared statement at first, and then I would like to refer to questions at the end, as well as addressing a few concerns I know the Council and zoning has had with my application, our application. To begin, I'm writing this not only as the owner of Monty's Greenhouse, but also as a community-conscious father of 4 school-aged daughters. My personal aim, and thereby the aim of Monty's Greenhouse, is to work closely with the community of Nanaimo in forming a symbiotic, mutually beneficial long-term relationship. We strive to provide access to a safe, professional environment for the purposes of retailing cannabis to the adult use market in the city of Nanaimo. Monty's Greenhouse is strictly a retail environment, and the company does not allow for the consumption in nor near the store itself. This is strictly enforced. Nor the surrounding areas, including parking lots or street sides. This is also enforced by my staff. This also includes any loitering. We do not allow for any loitering in the area, as well as in the store. As we mentioned, it is a retail environment. We provide a very friendly professional service, but it isn't a hangout, and we will not change that. The premise is monitored by a security camera. As per request by the provincial government, we must comply with their specific outline for security. They have a large series of requirements that must be met, and we have complied with several of the other stores that I do have, and I intend to do the exact same thing in Nanaimo, as I am seeking provincial approval for my license there as well. We support responsible consumption by adults according to provincial and municipal law and social moral governance of our customers and our community. The premise is clearly marked with no minor signage on the door, and customers must provide 2 pieces of government-issued ID upon entrance. This is strictly enforced in all of my stores. Through the use of frosted glass per provincial regulations, the inside of the premise is not visible from the street, and there shall be no displays or signage promoting the use of cannabis products of any kind. Furthermore, we have taken steps to greatly reduce the odors caused by the day-to-day operations of the store via pre-sealed packaging, again coming from a government distribution center, sealed there, delivered sealed, never to be opened on premise. Once it's in the customer's hand, it's taken to their private residence or vehicle and opened when they feel necessary. They must follow provincial and municipal guidelines. Can't be opened in the car, must not be used in vehicles. All these laws still fall into place, so the product will never be opened or consumed anywhere near the area. We also have installed the required filtering and ventilation system, also HVAC. It's a system required by the government for us to get our license. This will be in place. It's in place in each of my other stores, and highly, highly effective, a charcoal filter system, just to take care of any odors that may be.
1 minute, Mr. McPherson.
Thank you. Having had a long and successful working relationship in this area and municipality of Sechelt, I am both familiar with and have gone through the process of working with council and the community through the various steps and requirements, reaching out to supporting the community by means of charitable donations to local charities and programs, and by providing employment opportunities through hiring locally. To highlight just a couple of ways in which Monty's Greenhouse provides a positive impact on the community. Per our discussion with Dave Stewart, Monty's Greenhouse looks forward to submitting a payment in the amount of $10,000 to the Loudon Park Beautification Initiative via the official community plan. We are committed to providing a positive and lasting impact on the community, and we thank you in advance for your consideration to reverse a decision that was made on my proposal. And I will now turn it over to questions.
Thanks very much, Mr. McPherson. Questions from Councillor? Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the delegation. All of the things you mentioned there get mentioned every time we have one of these things. You have to do those by law anyway. But you haven't explained why we should grant you this license or this bylaw change, rezoning change, when you're in contravention of our recommendations of being too close to another one, which happened there. So why should we give this to you?
Thank you, through your worship, Councilor Bono. Looking through the recommendations, we found that that was the single one that we did not meet. At the time of application, we did not know about this other applicant. This other applicant came in first and was able to get there before us. In Sechelt, where I operate now, they did have a boundary, a 200-meter boundary in place, which we've reduced just to try and reduce the overall footprint in the city itself that marijuana distribution sales will have, as opposed to here, here, and here, and here, thereby expanding its overall footprint. There's 3 of us located within a 2-block radius, and that's all that there is. We will be such low profile as opposed to any of the other stores in the area, the frosted glass, the lack of loitering, the no smoking anywhere nearby, that the concerns by the community center, which would be concerns of mine as a parent of 4 kids under the age of 10, they should not notice any difference between us and any other store operating throughout the day. We do not advertise that we are a cannabis. We don't have big leaves on the window. There is no smoking. We don't allow loitering, and we do certainly not sell to minors. So our proximity to the other store, I believe, would only help to serve the community and giving some sort of selection as to where they can go, as opposed to having to drive. If they don't necessarily like, and let's be fair, like the space, they may have to go somewhere quite a ways out of their neighborhood to find another one then. And we're only about, we're at 87 meters as opposed to the requested 200. We're both going to be carrying exactly the same products because we can only buy from the one place. It's going to come down to customer service. That's where we're hoping we can stand above. And I think giving the community in that area, there's enough of an adult request, adult market there, that having to, even in that close of an area together, given the awareness of the negative impacts that are there, could only help serve the community and not hurt them. It would be friendly competition between the 2 of us, not product-based, customer service-based, because, as I said, we'll be selling identical products for the identical price, so it's going to come down to who serves the community the best, who the community enjoys being with the best, and then we can sort of work it out from there. I understand the need to address density, and, we don't want a quasi-red light district or anything else, and it's certainly not what we're looking for here either. I think that being ultra-low profile and keeping normal operational hours, no additional requirements for parking, it's already in a very retail-friendly space. I don't see that the proximity, myself personally, as I saw in Sechelt, would hurt the community in any way and would really only serve to enhance it. If they don't like the coffee here, they can go right there.
Mr. McPherson, I appreciate it was an open-ended question, so to speak, but I think you've been at it for about 3 or 4 minutes now. That's
Sorry.
Quite the answer.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. Are there any other questions from members of council? Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship, and again, my apologies for the time.
Councillor Hemmons?
Thank you. A question for staff. When someone comes forward with a site-specific zoning request and it is within that buffer zone and there already is another request in, is that shared with the applicant?
So certainly all of the active applications that we have are shared publicly. And if someone comes in for a pre-application meeting today, staff would point out to them any application within close proximity, yes.
Thank you. And a follow-up, if I may, I noticed that the neighborhood association did not support this rezoning. Did they support the other rezoning?
Your Worship, to be honest, I don't recall. I don't recall a letter of opposition from them, no, but I would have to go back and we could confirm that.
It's okay. It's okay. Thank you.
Anyone care to make the motion? Councillor Hemmons?
I'll move staff's recommendation.
Could you want to turn on your mic? So, thank you.
I'll move staff's recommendation.
Second?
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion on the motion?
Yep.
Councillor Armstrong? Councillor?
Thank you.
Oh, we're not sure where we're at now. Let's go to Councillor Thorpe, though.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I just wanted to clarify the motion. Is that staff's recommendation option 1?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll speak to it if I may. Several years ago, we had a site-specific rezoning for a liquor store, private liquor store. And I had nothing against the applicants, but my personal view was that there was already enough liquor stores in the vicinity where they wanted to locate, and so I could not support another outlet. And I feel the same way about this one. Nothing against the applicants, but there is already a prior application which council did approve, and this one is within 85 meters of that. So that, combined with the concerns of the neighborhood association, although they have not, I don't believe, formally objected to it, but they have some concerns. I just feel that one store in that area is enough. And I recognize the argument for good, healthy competition, but even so, that's my feeling on the subject. So again, nothing against the application, but I would not support another store in that same immediate vicinity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Any further discussion? Councillor Armstrong?
Well, thank you. I'll be voting in favor because I do not believe that there should be another one. We had the same issue last week, although that one did pass. But on this one, I'm going to stay consistent in my approach to all of these, that if they do not fall within the guidelines, I will not be supporting. This one does not fall within the guidelines. Secondly, there also is a third site, which is at the country club. So again, that's lots of competition. So I'm supporting the motion to deny. Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion to deny? Contrary? Motion carries. The next is supervised consumption service zoning options. Mr. Lindsay?
Thank you, Your Worship.
You're going to keep talking to Ms. Bopal Singh shows up.
There she is. Thank you, Your Worship. I'm quickly going to turn this over to Ms. Bopal Singh just to run through. We have a brief presentation just to outline the background on this report. But as you can see in the recommendations, staff are recommending some general, what I would term housekeeping or general amendments to our zoning bylaw. And we're also recommending that council give us direction to bring back an update on a report that was done in late December about health and social and safety issues in the downtown core. Your Worship, I'll turn it over to Ms. Bhopal Singh.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bhopal Singh, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Okay, as Mr. Lindsay stated, today we're going to go over a presentation related to the report before you that outlines some of the background to the supervised consumption service, what it is, and the zoning options that staff are presenting. Okay, so to begin with, for those of you at home and also present, Your Worship, we're going to explain that a supervised consumption site, also known, abbreviated to an SCS, and an overdose prevention site, are both forms of harm reduction health services where those individuals with substance use disorders can consume substances that are typically opioid-based under the supervision of trained staff who can intervene in the event of an overdose. And one of the key pieces here is that these are substances that are currently not legalized in Canada. So unlike an overdose prevention site, a supervised consumption site is permanent and requires an application to the federal government for an exemption under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. Now, the level of service between an overdose prevention site, which is temporary, and a supervised consumption site would be dependent on the discretion of the health authority. And to back up a little bit, the overdose prevention sites came into effect as a result of the declaration of a health crisis, and with the ability to override local governments and allow for overdose prevention sites to be situated in communities where the need was determined by the health authority. So an overdose prevention site is meant to address an immediate need in the community. It can be set up quickly under the provincial emergency order. They don't require federal exemption, and as such, they don't need to seek municipal approvals. Now, in the case of the overdose prevention site that you're familiar with on Wesley Street, this was actually set up with municipal support in May. The timeline you see here gives basically in 2014, Nanaimo had an overdose prevention working group formed. By 2016, BC had declared a public health emergency, and as part of that, Island Health worked with city staff, and the overdose prevention site on city-owned property that's leased by Island Health and Canadian Mental Health was opened in January of 2017, and the city amended its lease to allow that to take place. Subsequent to that, the city also put forward an application to rezone Wesley Street for a permanent supervised consumption site, with staff recommending that be done on behalf of Island Health. And following a public hearing and input from the community, business community, and surrounding neighbors, this application was actually denied by council. Since then, there's been a variety of, there was a recommendation made for council, by council, to have a committee look at this. And in the meantime, also, a community action team was established in Nanaimo, which involved peer-based participation and funding from the province of $100,000 to address the opioid crisis. So what is local government's role in siting supervised consumption sites? Basically, an application for a supervised consumption site requires that the applicant undertake general community consultation and include a report on activities and a plan to address any concerns. However, since council considered the rezoning back in 2017, there have been some changes, and now the application process has been simplified and no longer requires specific input from the local government. In terms of land use and zoning, different local governments have taken a variety of approaches, from either approving supervised consumption sites as a site-specific use by including it as a health service, and appropriate zoning is not considered in the exemption process, but is a requirement for adhering to local government bylaws. So under Nanaimo's current zoning bylaw, there's a definition that most closely reflects a supervised consumption site is the drug addiction treatment facility for the use of a building to treat persons with a substance use problem, including a needle exchange facilities, safe injection sites, methadone clinics, and the like. Granted, in this language, I'd like to state that we probably wouldn't use language like substance use problems anymore. And this language was originally, as I understand it, developed with Island Health a couple of years ago this is pre the opioid crisis, as a means of looking at how a treatment facility could be cited should an application be made. So while it's defined in the zoning bylaw, there's not currently any permitted use that allows that in any zone. So that means that basically, as our bylaw currently stands, there would be required a rezoning on a site-specific basis for a drug addiction treatment facility under this definition. The medical health officer for Nanaimo sent staff a letter on May 23rd requesting that this drug addiction treatment facility definition be removed and that a supervised consumption service be considered part of a medical or dental office. This is a use which is permitted in most commercial and mixed-use zones. We've had ongoing input from the medical health office that the supervised consumption service is an essential health service and that zoning regulations that distinguish this service from any other type of health service is discriminatory and potentially stigmatizing towards drug users. Now, in terms of how Nanaimo and others deal with zoning for harm reduction services, there's a variety of responses across the province and across the country. For example, in Abbotsford, in 2014, they actually repealed a zoning prohibition on all harm reduction activities, including needle exchanges, and there are currently no plans for supervised consumption service in that municipality. Some communities have specifically introduced supervised consumption service definitions into their zoning bylaws to make them site-specific, and those examples are Red Deer, London, Medicine Hat. And all of the existing supervised consumption services in BC that have been allowed as medical uses without a requirement for rezoning have been considered that way under an interpretation of their current health services in their zoning bylaws. So a supervised consumption service is definitely a health service, but there's a precedent in the zoning bylaw for requiring, in Nanaimo and other places, a site-specific zoning use for uses that have potential for greater community impact. So one example is how council has considered site-specific for cannabis. They're not blanket allowed anywhere there's a commercial use, for example. The same with liquor retail stores. And they go through a process of referrals both to Island Health and then careful consideration by staff before being brought back to council for consideration. Now, while some supervised consumption services may include wraparound services that are different under an overdose prevention service, the temporary, we currently have no information on what these could be, and we're aware that there may be resource constraints that prevent anything other than the current level of service in Nanaimo being provided. Once zoning is in place under existing regulations, should council decide to allow a blanket-wide approach as part of a medical use, council would not be able to put in additional considerations compared to a site-specific application process where by individual consideration there could be conditions put for each site that council considers. Oops. So to sum up, the report you have before you has two options. The first one is the recommended option, which is to continue to consider supervised consumption service a site-specific use, requiring rezoning for every application for an exemption. If this were to be selected by council, staff would recommend repealing the definition of a drug addiction treatment facility and updating it to more accurately reflect a supervised consumption service. Council also does have the option of approving an application for a supervised consumption service under a temporary use permit, which allows for the use for 3 years and renewable for another further 3 years. Then some of the advantages of option 1 would be allowing council greater control over the location of permanent health services, such as a supervised consumption service, that have the potential for significant community impact. It also allows council to add conditions of the rezoning approval. The disadvantages potentially are less flexibility for Island Health in citing options for supervised consumption applicants, should it be Island Health or otherwise, and potentially less ability to respond to the opiate crisis. It could also be perceived as stigmatizing towards substance users. The second alternative is to move forward with providing more flexibility for citing options for the provision of supervised consumption services by considering it part of a health service and allowing it under the definition of office, medical, or dental as a permitted use. And this would mean allowing the use in most commercial and mixed-use zones throughout Nanaimo. If this option is selected, the definition of office medical use would need to be updated, and the use drug addiction treatment facility would need to be removed from the zoning bylaw. The advantages of this option would be to strengthen the relationship with the health authority by trusting in their citing process. It would ensure harm reduction services would be in place to serve vulnerable populations, reduce deaths. The disadvantages, however, would be that the city would not have a substantive role in site selection and might create site management issues that end up being addressed by the RCMP and bylaws. And part of this is exemplified by the current OPS, or overdose prevention site, and some of the impacts on Wesley Street. So in terms of community engagement, and this is again another piece around staff's recommendation for a site-specific approach where public hearing would be required as part of rezoning, the medical health officer has confirmed that for an application for a supervised consumption service to be considered complete, Health Canada requires that efforts be made to engage with the community and inform them of the proposal and ensure that the voices of community members have been heard. This doesn't necessarily mean that community concerns could veto a particular site, but that they must be addressed in the application. If council opts for a site-specific zoning option, a public hearing would be part of the community engagement. And again, council could put in conditions to ensure that community concerns are addressed. So that's the report before you in terms of the recommendations. Our recommendation also includes that council directs staff to bring forward a report on the responses to the health and social and safety issues in the downtown. This was a report that went before council on December 11th, 2017. And council supported a number of recommendations to deal with some of the challenges in the downtown area, some of which are related to those who are street entrenched and struggle with substance use disorders. So staff proposed bringing forward an update to council or the Health and Housing Task Force in the summer of 2019 on some of the responses outlined and approved by council in that report. So that concludes my presentation. If you have questions.
Ms. Vopel saying if I can just summarize it from my own understanding, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong. Essentially, a supervised consumption site can be, well, I won't say imposed, but placed in any community as long as the federal government okays it, regardless of what zoning or municipal bylaws exist? Or are you saying that it can only be done if there's a process?
So the supervised consumption service, an application has to be made. So the federal government has to approve a site. The question becomes how much strength the local government and community have in that application process. So if you choose to allow it to be widely allowed throughout different zones, you have less of an input or say in the process from the local government piece. And our understanding is that while the federal government could approve it, they are less likely to when local governments have another process that
Right,
has to
but
be-
what my point is, and I want to be clear on this because it's important and I appreciate these are difficult issues. If the federal government approves a supervised consumption site, it can be approved wherever the federal government wishes to do so, and the city essentially has no way of stopping that. However, if we put in place a zoning requirement, it does allow for a formal public hearing and process, which presumably they may wish to or can choose not to if they wish also, to pay attention to that process.
That's correct. We have our own bylaws that we are allowed to uphold. I hope that helps, Your Honor.
As opposed to having nothing in place, in which case the federal government, if they approve a site, can do so having regard to what they see as appropriate public consultation, which may or may not comply with city bylaws in the normal sense in which we engage in public hearings for rezonings.
That would
Again.
be if council chose to distribute throughout medical office use.
Right, but what I'm getting at is if they, it's their choice as to what that process looks like. And if they're happy with it, they can proceed. If they're not happy with it, they can proceed. But there is no legal requirement for them to proceed with a public process, whereas if we have a rezoning process in place, then we are entitled, based on what I'm being told, we are entitled to put the site through a public process which allows for the kind of formal public hearings that we have on any rezoning application.
That's correct, Your Worship.
Thank you. Pardon me for jumping in first and droning on, but I just want to be perfectly clear about what we're looking at and my understanding. Thank you very much, Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. Paul Singh. In the documents that we read, there is reference to mobile SESs. Are they an actual mobile unit that runs around, or is it the staff or the people who are dealing with it that going from one site to another?
Councillor Turley, through the chair, it is the latter. Although it's called mobile, one of the examples is Kamloops. They actually have two separate sites, and a unit moves between two sites. So essentially, it's not actually driving around to different sites. They have two sites that are zoned for that use, and they move between them.
But the actual material and equipment that's required to be this SES is in both locations? It's not in a vehicle that moves from one to another?
It is in the case of Kamloops, it's in a vehicle that moves between the two locations.
Thank you. Yep.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. Bhopal Singh. First of all, I appreciate the comments and questions of Your Worship. I think they touched upon an important issue or issues. Mine is much less so, but I just wanted clarification from staff. In option 1 of the recommendation from staff, bring forward proposed changes to City of Nanaimo zoning bylaw to repeal the definition of drug addiction treatment facility. Am I correct in understanding that this is basically just changing away from wording which we no longer find acceptable or we're being encouraged not to use anymore? So we don't want to call it drug addiction, we'll call it a medical challenge or something like that?
Through your chair to Councillor Thorpe, yes, it is to update the language to be more appropriate by how we address the concerns of those who are struggling with substance use disorders.
And that's the only and all intent of Part A?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to provide that revision and to make it more applicable to the supervised consumption service specifically as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Sorry, I have another question. So taking away the drug addiction treatment facility designation, how does that affect the facility on Boxwood Road, whose name I forget at the moment, where they treat?
Edgewood, yeah.
Edgewood, that's it, yeah. Do they have to reapply for new zoning, or?
Yeah. That particular facility actually doesn't fall under this definition.
Oh, okay.
It falls under the definition of a personal care facility.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions, Ms. Bopal Singh?
Oh, no, I was going to move the motion, recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong, you're going to move the motion?
Delegation.
Your
Move
worship.
recommendation.
No,
Pardon me, we've
your
got to
worship.
get the delegation
Yes,
first.
that's correct. Thank you, your worship.
The patient, Mr. Hasselbeck, or Dr. Hasselbeck. Good evening, and you've presented before, so I don't have to tell you about the 5 and 4 and 1.
Worship and members of council and the administration. I do wish I was able to answer some of your questions because we need to get over some of this. Time has come to move to the modern age. In February of 2018, I provided a report to council on the progress towards addressing the overdose response within Nanaimo that flagged significant forward progress and areas for emphasis. Among the recommendations was that the recommendation that council address the obstacle to substance use treatment found in the definition of a drug addiction treatment facility of the city's zoning bylaw. This evening's report takes a step forward to addressing those concerns. In preparation for this, I was asked by city staff to provide an opinion and outline some of the steps. And I'll be quite clear, nothing is going to happen in this city, no matter what you do tonight, without your involvement and approval. And it does not matter what you do to the zoning bylaw. However, that zoning bylaw is a barrier when it comes to consideration as to whether anything will go forward. So think carefully. We undertook a survey in the province relative to your comparators. No other community has a similar zoning bylaw that requires site-specific zoning for a supervised consumption site in the province of BC. There might be a couple more in the entire country. We've moved forward with supervised consumption as a health service without necessarily having a process which can be an impediment and can actually be divisive for the community. We saw that division in this room 2 years ago. It wasn't necessary because the process had been followed up to that point in time. But because that outlet was there, we've ended up in a situation which has not benefited the people of Nanaimo. The current bylaw has 2 major barriers. We've identified the one relative to the drug addiction treatment facility, and it is more than supervised consumption. It also relates to specialized treatment using opiate agonist therapies. If we were to bring in a tertiary type of service in this community, we cannot do it under this current bylaw. So that needs to go. It's stigmatizing language. It probably wouldn't stand up to a human rights challenge the way it is currently undertaken because of the fact that you're using a diagnosis to preclude a class of individuals from receiving a service which is necessary. Okay, the fact that it is in there, and Island Health was not involved in the establishment of that. We weren't around in 2003 when this language went in. The second barrier is whether you go to a site-specific zoning, whether you go to a class such as medical office health services, as most other communities have, and this is a health service, or whether you just not put it in there because it'll be treated as a health service anyway. It will be treated as a health service anyway. The federal exemption process perhaps has some wording in it that is flexible to meet community needs. I've spoken with them. They're not about to go forward without ensuring that this council, this community, this province is engaged in those conversations relative to what is required. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the zoning bylaw or not. Okay? You will be involved. What won't happen is the blood battle that happens with a public hearing that leads to the division in this community which isn't necessary. We have an OPS, which has already been alluded to. It provides clinical services already
1 minute, Dr.
to those people that are requiring those services. Unfortunately, it was hasty when it went in. It's now being corralled by fences that this council and previous councils have put in place. It is no longer in the right location because that's basically a human corral up there and people are being pushed to it Most of the people aggregating around Wesley Street are not using the overdose prevention site. As a matter of fact, they've become a barrier to people who need to use that service. I think there are a few other misconceptions, some of which came forward. However, I think that part of it comes down to you've got a process going forward on the housing and health, lots of support for that. We welcome the opportunity to be involved in contributing to solutions in the future. But in summary, both options resolve the current structural stigma embedded in the zoning bylaw, and it's welcomed. If you feel you must include a supervised consumption site in the zoning bylaw, option 2 is recommended over option 1, but you don't need to put it in there at all. And that's a recommendation from the provincial health officer as well. And then we recommend that you go ahead with the hearing about what was recommended to council in 2017 and not implemented.
Time, and I think we're all going to have a number of questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Dr. Hasselbeck. You and I have had many discussions around this. One of the concerns I have, and it continues to be a concern, and when you talk about the Wesley Street, the Overdose Prevention Center, we've never been able to get stats as to the number of people that are using. We get the number of visits, but we never hear how many people, so that's one of my concerns. My second concern is they go in, they use, they come out, then they become the problems of the neighborhood and the police. That's exactly why we have fences up here, because it may not be the people using that site, but it's the people that come around it. So we do have to deal with that, because we do represent all of the city, not just a portion of the city. So those are very real concerns for me when our police resources are there every day. We know that, you know that. That's a concern. Our bylaws are there every day. Our staff is scared to leave the building, so we have to put up fences. So these are the realities we as a council face, and I understand the realities you face because you want to save lives. So we need to come up with a solution that's going to address both those concerns. And one of the concerns I have, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we were to look at the safe consumption site, will there be a guarantee that those people can stay on site for 2 hours so that when they're in their high and they're causing the issues, that they will be in a good place, not on the streets where the police and the bylaws and civilians are left to deal with it? Thank you.
Through your worship to Councillor Armstrong, and I do wish we could get over some of these misconceptions. Mr. Harrison, who runs the overdose prevention site on Wesley Streets here, was out the other night, on Saturday night. The vast majority of people on Wesley Street are not the individuals who are currently using the overdose prevention site. So a misconception, and it's one that keeps getting propagated. People who have used in the overdose prevention site tend to be using opioids. They're downs. They come down. They're not aggressive. They're not agitated. They're actually, the reason why they stick around is not to chill out, but to actually be sure that they're not going to crash. Okay, and that's what the chill sessions are, and that's what being on site, they're actually encouraged not to stay around once they're back up. Most people who are using an overdose prevention site now are not the street entrenched individuals. There are some, okay, there's no doubt about that. That's not what this service is about. And until there's a recognition that this is about a health service, and the roughly 2% of the population in this city alone that have a substance use disorder that's opiate-based, and we're trying to reach out to them and actually get them into treatment and bring them back on a path of recovery, we need to get past some of this.
Councillor Gasselbrook.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Dr. Hasselbeck. I'm curious, with the zoning of substance use treatment as a medical service, will that allow people access, say if it is in multiple locations, to opioid replacement therapy, have better access to that?
Okay, thank you, and to Councillor Griesbeck, through your worship. Not having a site-specific approach would allow for a more disseminated model for consumption, and certainly there's consideration in place and lots of discussion going on about how does this get incorporated into other existing, particularly health services that are already mobilized. So we may have a conflict there anyway. Acute Care Hospital is one that keeps coming up frequently. But I don't think it's the only one. You've talked about bringing them into more treatment. Actually, where we can link together the treatment with the provision of engaging individuals by providing a safe environment where they can develop that trusting relationship so much is about trust. They need to set up that trusting relationship. They need to be working with individuals that will not be judgmental of them and will accept them for where they are at that point in time and work with them to move forward, including into treatment. And the broader we have that disseminated, the sooner we're going to be able to get out of this crisis.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple of questions to Dr. Hasselbeck. First of all, are you aware of what the experience was with regard to community involvement in some of these other communities listed, Vancouver, Victoria, Kamloops, Kelowna, and Surrey, when a proposal for SES was presented?
Through Your Worship to Councillor Turley, I'm aware of some of it. I've actually spoken to many of the people being involved in the application process, particularly in Vancouver. Certainly fairly familiar with the Victoria, I'm aware of Surrey, and I have enough connections up in Kelowna and Kamloops. Having said that, though, I think there's a lot more that needs to be said about what does that process look like relative to the expectations, not only to demonstrate to Health Canada, who actually have fairly rigorous requirements, about what that community engagement has looked like and what has been undertaken at a local level. Most supervised consumption sites in Canada have not moved forward because of insufficient community engagement. And until Health Canada has been satisfied that that has occurred, they have not gone ahead with the approvals. I think that's the most important message to get across. I think we've learned from other sites relative to what is more effective. How do we engage, and how do we be sure that everyone's perspective is on the table?
Thank you. If I could ask my second question, Worship, thank you. Where communities have the mobile SESs, have they discovered that discarded needles has diminished, or is it still a challenge?
Thank you, and again, through Your Worship. I've certainly spoken at length with my colleagues in Kelowna and Kamloops, and they would not recommend using their current approach. 4 hours in one site, it doesn't work. We've got individuals that are probably needing to be supervised up to 3 times a day if they're consuming. There's aggregation occurring as the sites are moving around. They've had problems with the vehicle. And it really is, and they've actually got 2 site approvals, okay, and they just drive back and forth between the 2 sites. That's all they do. They've had problems with the space on the inside. They've had problems with connections. It's just not something that they recommended. Where mobile has potentially worked has always been where there is stationary and long-standing sites in place, and it's an augmentation and an outreach type of program. So I don't want to say that there isn't a role for mobile, but there isn't a role for mobile before you get to the point where you've got a location, which is the lead for your supervised consumption service. And in most of those other settings, they've got disseminated models of multiple locations now.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Dr. Hasselbeck. In a supervised consumption services site, are they allowed to, do they only use opiates, as you mentioned, or do they ingest other drugs like methamphetamines and various other ones of which I don't know?
Yeah, through Your Worship, there is, I'm going to say anyone who wishes to use a substance in that location can use a substance, and it's not vetted in advance as to what that substance is. The staff usually do try to get that information because they'd like to know what is expected in terms of what's occurring, so that's part of the normal process. Experiences being that most of the individuals coming forward are fearful of what's happened, and that fear has been driven by the contamination toxicity associated with fentanyl, carfentanil in the opioid, and they're the people that are the dominant group that's using the overdose prevention sites. So I think I've answered your question that anyone can use them. The shortcoming in most of them right now is we haven't necessarily resolved the issue of inhalation in those sites, but certainly we would like to be looking at that, and there are approved sites in Canada now that actually do have inhalation options occurring as well.
If If I may, Your Worship, going back to Councillor Armstrong's comments, so if they're not only using opioids, but they're using other types of drugs which are not downers, and then they are okay and then leave the facility, what would be the responsibility of this facility to have someone walking the street who just took meth?
Your Worship, I think that's a reasonable question. As I say, there are chill rooms, there are other options. If I'd have to be looking at Insight where most of the experience is, and again, we're not tending to look at individuals that are hyper excited when they leave the facility. They're certainly not welcome, they're not encouraged to leave that facility. They have much better, as Councillor Armstrong's alluded to, chill spaces. If that was something that needed to be bringing somebody down. Where we see the agitation tends to be on individuals that are currently not using in the overdose prevention site, more street-oriented, tend to be more inhalation-based. I think that comes back to how do we engage that population? And if we're trying to look at community safety, if we don't have a service in place, we can't engage, we don't develop the trust, we don't lead to the therapeutic relationships that lead to solutions in the long term.
Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Dr. Hasselbeck, for those that are listening, could you please tell us the difference between an overdose prevention site and a safe consumption site?
Thank you, and again, through your worship. The safe consumption site is a designation under Section 56.1 of the Controlled Substances Act that allow for an exemption for individuals in that location to be in possession of a controlled substance. That is what a safe consumption site actually is. An overdose prevention site was established under a ministerial directive in the province of BC during the state of public health emergency, which we are still in at this point in time, and allows for ostensibly the same things. Subsequently, there has been a negotiation and the federal government has provided a blanket Section 56 exemption to the overdose prevention sites. However, they're still contingent on the establishment of an overdose of the crisis. We are seeing in 2019 for the first time in the province a decrease in overdose fatalities. And I've alluded to council in the past, we've seen a substantive decrease in fatalities here in Nanaimo, but perhaps that was because we saw a substantive increase. So I'm hopeful, and I will remain hopeful, that we might actually get through this crisis. What I'm not hopeful of is that we're not going to have substance use problems afterwards that are going to need an overdose, supervised consumption and ongoing services. So I think this is a long-term commitment.
And a follow-up, is it not true that every time somebody is had to be brought back with naloxone that there is some type of brain damage or damage to the brain?
And again, through your worship, every time the answer would be no. But this is a definite concern where individuals who have had an anoxic event and have been recovered are developing a toxic or a brain injury syndrome. And that may be progressive in such a fashion. It's probably not reversible in most circumstances. What we don't know is how often that's occurring, what proportion of our current users are actually in that sort of pathway, and what does that mean for the future of other health services that we're going to have to provide in terms of accommodation, appropriate housing, and structured environments for those individuals.
And just my last question, and I guess just the last concern I have, and I've had this conversation with you before, we heard from Superintendent Miller when he was here last year that when the Wesley Street site did open up, that there was a 200% increase in crime. Now, you've said that there's a lot of issues around that. However, the reality it may not be the people that are there, but it has a tendency to bring different individuals there. So how do you propose we deal with that? Because it is our reality, and it's a reality that we hear from our residents regularly that, we heard from a pediatrician that was shutting down because he lost his clients because they wouldn't come because they were so scared of the people around there. So these are issues these are our realities. They may just be perceptions, but they're the perceptions that we as a council get. So when you're asking us to make these changes, we have to go back to almost 100,000 people and tell them why. When they are dealing with what you say may be misconceptions, but when you hear from your chief of police that no, crime did go up to 100%, who are they going to believe? So those are my issues that I have to face when I make these types of decisions.
Thank you. Through your worship, I think that we've noticed every time we put in a social service, whether it's a overdose prevention site, whether it's Discontent City, whether it is our housing units, that we've seen adjacent changes in criminal behavior. That's a very real, and I support Superintendent Miller, that is a very real issue. Part of that means how do we engage at that local level. One of the things the overdose prevention sites were not structured to do is to involve in that engagement actually outside. I think that one of the things that I would encourage in any discussion for a supervised consumption site, because that's when we're going to get change, is what does it look like in order to have that engagement, not just of the neighborhood, but also of those individuals that may aggregate in the neighborhood, either to not have them aggregating there, or perhaps engage them more in a therapeutic relationship.
Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Dr. Hasselback. I mean, the decision tonight is really to go with the site-specific city zoning to get a safe consumption site. Thank you, Councillor Hammonds. Or to revise the definition of an office medical dental. And I'm just curious, like, is there something stopping Island Health to go ahead and cite a specific spot and go through the city process of zoning at this point? Like, is that still an option that we can go forward to make this happen? Because it does sound like it's a very important service to provide, health service to provide the community. And I'm just curious, is that a possibility to go that route still?
So through your worship, and this actually came up in a letter that was written by your worship, we actually did that. It was turned down in May, and then it was advised that we come back and sit with the city. We have sat with the city for the last 2 years following a process that's led to this evening, because we want something to go forward. Okay, that's the general perception. I've been open about this. I think the federal government's going to move faster in terms of decriminalizing possession, at which point in time this may be a moot conversation relative to how do we proceed forward. I actually think that's a very real possibility as to whether we'll get a supervised consumption site in, or whether it's just going to be decriminalization of possession, at which point in time we can have a really honest, good conversation about how do we provide that in a safer environment.
So just to follow up on that then, I mean, that is a route forward. If the city decides we can go and cite a location, we can go through our own zoning process to get one of these, or can Island Health initiate that process and then we go through our public hearing process?
Thank you, through your worship. The zoning bylaw process is your process. I can't necessarily speak for Island Health, but no one in Island Health is not going to follow a city process. That's again why we're here at this point in time. If the option one was chosen, and then was a decision that there was a desire to actually pursue that, I think we're going to have some conversations about how do we do that and not end up in the same situation we did last time. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is a very real concern. It's not the only concern. I think that there's more about where's trust, where's some faith in the system as it is out there, that no one is out to turn things around. But I do think things are going to change over time. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I think you've got to be more flexible than less flexible.
And to follow up on that, thank you. I think that is the concern, is that because these substances and opioids are illegal, there is this whole element of criminality that does come along with it. And having it decriminalized and made available would relieve a lot of that stress. And I think the fear in the community is that the resources aren't available to support the community in dealing with the criminal aspect around this. That does seem to concentrate around these locations. And I agree with you that there does seem to be a lack of trust, but at the end of the day, the municipality does wear the public disorder and the issues with crime. And I'm curious, with the supervised consumption site, will there be additional resources made available to the community through the province to actually deal with these other issues that do come along, that does appear to seem to come along with having these specific services available?
Okay, thanks. And through your worship, one of the points I didn't get to is that there's no federal funding that comes with this. If we were to move forward at this point in time, it would be within the existing resources that are already allocated. There would be no additional resources to do anything more than we currently are dedicating, but we are putting a fair bit in terms of the supports to the current overdose prevention site. I'm not sure how much more would be reallocated, but times are tight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Dr. Hasselbeck. I have two questions for you. Just so I'm absolutely clear, if council were to approve the staff proposed amendment tonight, which is ultimately a change of wording to a definition, is Island Health prepared to move with a supervised consumption site? Is that the path forward? And then my second question is that evidence does suggest that supervised consumption sites see fewer ambulance trips, lower overdose deaths, and helps prevent the spread of disease, etc. Is there evidence that supports the people's path to recovery through supervised consumption sites as well, not just reduced overdose?
Okay, thank you. And through your worship to Councillor Brown, there's several points in there. Please remind me if I forget them. Will Island Health move forward? I actually don't know. Okay, I'm going to say we've been engaged in this conversation, but I can't actually speak for the organization whether it will proceed, and some of it may rest upon their perceptions of what council chooses to do. Okay, so I can't say one way or another. It's certainly in everyone's mind, and I personally, as your medical health officer, believe that this community needs a supervised consumption site. So I will continue to suggest that that is a good thing to do. So that's number one. In terms of, is there evidence? First of all, there's been no fatalities, and yes, we've seen ambulance reductions occurring from the overdose prevention sites. So they're achieving some of those same health service benefits that supervised consumption sites are. There is evidence out of Insight, which is the only place that's really been rigorously evaluated relative to being able to move individuals into treatment. I do think that the outreach that we have into the overdose prevention sites, the provision of services and supports to those sites when an individual wishes to say, hey, I really want to make an honest go of it at this point in time, or I want to make a go of it, that we'll get the services there. And I think that is different from a few years ago. We're not tracking very well in terms of how successful we are with our current sites here on the island, outside of Victoria, sorry. Did I answer your questions?
Yeah.
Okay,
sorry.
thank you, Councillor Brown.
Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you. I have a lot going through my head, and most of it is commentary rather than questions, so I'm trying to formulate it into a question for you. I'll be really honest. We've had this conversation. I'm in support of a supervised consumption site. I have a very up-close and intimate experience of the opioid epidemic in our city. However, I think how we get there is I view that we're approaching it very differently. And one of the differences that I'd like you to kind of speak to is you noted that because that outlet is there, and that outlet was the public hearing in 2017, you said that we failed, and you actually used the term blood battle. And so I agree. That was probably that wasn't the outcome I had hoped for. That was a bit of a messy process, and I think council does require bravery in facing down citizens who are really upset and to say, this is something we believe in, this will support our community health. So I'm recognizing, I guess, that there's everybody had a role to play in that decision in 2017. So going forward, with you suggesting that the public hearing process was a blood battle and was what failed that entire process, how do we then trust that if we open up our zoning, that we're not going to have that we're not going to have something forced upon us? If you're, so your job is to keep the public healthy, and I respect and admire that mandate greatly. My mandate is to listen to the public. And I think the public hearings are an opportunity, it's a tool where people come and tell us what they're thinking and what they're feeling. It doesn't necessarily define how we make decisions, but it's a process that is imperative to how we do our jobs. So how do we reconcile that difference? How do we reconcile that you and I want the same thing, but your process is, for me, and I think for community members, can feel really quite alarming when we see public consultation as a blood battle? It's a very foggy question, but...
Yeah, Your Worship, the term bloodbath was used by the previous incumbent in that chair on numerous occasions to describe public hearings. So it's actually not my perception. Irrespective of which of these options you choose, okay, if there is a process that goes forward with the supervised consumption site, there's going to be a consultation process that'll involve the opportunity for the public and yourselves, okay, perhaps even in these chambers, to have a conversation about whether it's appropriate or inappropriate for particular sites. Okay? If you ask that that's what you would like, whether it's in the zoning bylaw or not, I suspect that it would happen, because that's the level of commitment that we are expected to show Health Canada relative to the engagement. So if you come and ask, we would like you to present, we would like to have a conversation here within this room, then that's probably going to happen. Okay, some of it still sits with you in terms of what you would like. Some councils have chosen that they actually don't want to be involved. Okay, again, that comes back to the particular councils. I don't see yourselves being in a position that you're actually wanting to give up that involvement. So ask, and we certainly, irrespective of which of the options are churning, okay, can have multiple conversation if that's what needed in order to come up with an appropriate site.
And if I may, the one where we open up the zoning, that's a very, that puts us in a position of needing to trust the process. Whereas if we keep the zoning as is with the language suggested, then we actually have some mechanism to say, actually, I might support it and the mayor might support it, but if the community completely doesn't support it, at the end of the day, there has to be some opportunity for us to say, we do represent 100,000 people. And we all take that job very seriously. It's not about what I think or what you think, it's about what the community thinks. So I'll share that I'm inclined to go with option one because I feel like it protects our ability to maintain some control over this, but I will share very openly that I'm in support of the outcome of a supervised consumption site. Because I think this is something that our community would benefit from. Yeah, I think I'll just leave it there.
So, Your Worship, just shortly, ultimately it comes down to trust. And I accept that, okay? And that's why I have to look to what's normal for your peers out there. They have a lot more faith in the system.
May I?
One more go.
Thank you. I think, thank you for indulging me. I think the Wesley Street experience is one that has eroded trust. And I really hear you that the social disorder that we are seeing in that area of town is not necessarily directly related to those using the OPS, but the fact is the community members, and I think anyone who has been down there, they tie them together. I certainly did not want to build fences around City Hall. But because that issue is not being addressed, that's a lot of faith to put into the community and a lot of trust to say, we know it's not going well down there, and look, we're going to do it again over here. And by the way, we don't have extra resources to devote to it, and we don't know what that's going to look like for our police force. So I hear you that it's about trust, and I'm saying that to date, I don't think that trust has been established.
Thank you, and through your worship, your third recommendation up there is to bring back recommendations that this council is supposed to be working on, which were to address that very issue. And we've been open about being willing to participate in that process. And there are some very concrete recommendations in there that we think are actually very well aligned with resolving the issues, whether you stay at Wesley Street or not, okay, for a supervised consumption site. You need to come back and take a very close look at those recommendations and move them forward. And there were issues with aggregation at Diana Krall Square going back. There were issues around Discontent City. You know, I've been at this long enough, I can tell you when the sex trade was more on the streets, that communities used to push the red zone around, okay? And that's part of what occurs. Right now, that zone for this community is on Wesley Street. You can move it, but my big question to you would be, where does it get moved to? It's not going away, and the establishment of a supervised consumption site is not going to make it go away either. So be realistic in your expectations, whether you trust me or not.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hasselbeck. I'm very appreciative of your patience in answering a number of questions and on occasion listening more to the heartfelt feelings of many members of council. This is an important issue, and I just say to council that in future, depending on topics, I may exercise my right to expect more questions from council than comments, but this is an issue that confronts our community every day, as has been outlined by many speakers tonight, one in which we receive a great deal of correspondence, either directly or indirectly. At this point, we are just finishing the delegations, and we have a motion to move to, if anyone cares to move it, so that we can actually have a discussion. Councillor Armstrong?
I'd like to move the recommendation.
Is there a seconder?
Which recommendation?
There's only one recommendation.
Motion in the...
To bring forward proposed change in the state of
Agenda,
Nanaimo
yes.
zoning bylaw. So
A seconder?
I'll second.
Seconded? There is a motion in the agenda. That's the motion that's been moved.
Option 1.
What's the recommendation? Option 1's the recommendation.
I realize we've been at it a long time and everyone's tired, but Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, I'm voting for option 1 because I do believe that the community should have an input into that. I think it's very important. I think the majority of this council went on community engagement when they were running for council, that community engagement was very important to them. And if we don't have that, then I don't believe you do have the same community engagement that there is. And I echo what Councillor Hammond says. I think there is a big issue around trust, not only just with it's just with any level of governments. We saw that when the supportive housing came in, the way it came in. That's created nothing but issues for supportive housing now because the way it's been done on Labio and Terminal. So we've got that uphill battle. So for me, I think it's really important that we do have the ability to go to public hearing, and then those that have their courage of convictions will be able to vote that way at that time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did not have questions for Dr. Hasselbeck, and I still don't, which is good because he's now comfortably sitting. But I think we heard quite a bit of the debate that is now supposed to take place. And I think the words of Councillor Hemmons a few minutes ago really summed things up very well for how I feel. I personally will support the motion which is on the floor, which is option 1. My feeling is, with great respect to Dr. Hasselback and the work that he does, I feel that council has a responsibility to be involved in these decisions as directly as possible, and if necessary, to take the heat for the decisions that we make. And as other people were asking questions, in the back of my mind, I was thinking that earlier this evening we were talking about a site-specific application for cannabis. And we do site-specific applications and approvals for liquor stores. We don't just say that they're medical offices or pharmacies. And I think that's good. That's a responsibility that council has, to vet those applications, to consult with the neighborhood, to get public input, and then hopefully make a decision which is good for the majority of people. So I won't belabor the point, but I will support council retaining control over locations, and that is the intent of option 1 at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you. I will be voting in support of the motion with some reservation as stated. I wish there were a middle ground. I wish it weren't we keep it this way, or we allow it anywhere in the city, potentially trusting that the engagement process will be thorough enough to satisfy residents. Neither of those seem really great to me. I will say that as one of 2 council appointees to the Health and Housing Task Force, this is something that I truly hope we will be able to tackle in a very strategic way. And I will also encourage Island Health, if this motion passes tonight, to identify a site and let us do the hard work with you. I believe that there was a lack of bravery, I think, around the last decision, and these are very difficult decisions to make, and I understand that. However, I would hope that this council would be very brave in establishing that people are dying and this is needed. So I will be voting in support of this.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I will not be voting in favor of this. I'm in favor of partially in favor of the option that was presented by Dr. Hasselback. I think rigidity here is contributing to the problem. It's unnecessary delay. I think actually pulling from cannabis and the liquor process, in the sense that we can have a policy around citing criteria that might take into some of the more particular concerns around some sites. But if we're going to focus on a single site, I've seen this process, whether it's with this or other things, play out too many times. There is no perfect site, and so this is an issue in our community that is, hopefully at some point will get better, but it requires a more adaptable approach, and I think this is overly rigid. Essentially, we're going through an exercise to change a definition that achieves nothing out on the landscape. So I do think there is a middle ground. I think it's some hard work, and I think you don't gain trust by not being able, if you're not willing to take a chance. And so I would be willing to take a chance in coming up with a more comprehensive approach that considers multiple sites, and maybe has some policy around making sure that it doesn't impact some overly sensitive sites.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too, like Councillor Brown, can't support the motion. The reason being, we've said all along, to my recollection, that this issue of addictions and crime is not a city responsibility. At least it's not something we can deal with. And yet, on the other hand, we're turning around and we're making it potentially difficult for the level of government who wants to actually deal with it. So I think we have to develop a level of trust with the other levels of government and let them do their job, and let's get this problem fixed.
Councillor Gesselbrook.
Through your worship to council, I agree with the sentiments of Councillor Brown and Turley. I definitely understand the position that this is a really tricky situation, and there is a lot of fear around it, and I think that is what is affecting the sense of trust to work collaboratively and move forward. And I think partly to get past that, to get to that trust is to recognize the fear and to accept that we do need to work together and trust all different levels of government to take responsibility for this issue and move forward. The problem is already there. And right now, because of inaction, we are withholding an essential service that will help people not die. And with any other illness, we would be acting extremely quickly. And I do think that there is a good level of stigmatization against folks that are dealing with addictions and access to safe ways of consuming opioids. And I do think that essential that we need to be advocating for the medical dispensation of these substances and get over the prohibition that is creating the whole crime situation around that. And I think that's the fundamental issue. A safe consumption site, wherever it's located, is not going to solve the larger problem, and we still need to advocate very strongly for it. And so I think to get the ball rolling and to get this job done, I would support option 2 of opening up the zoning and allowing for that process. So I won't be voting in support of this motion, and I would like to see the motion for option 2 put forward should this motion be not carried. Thank you.
Ms. Gurry, Councillor Hemmens would like to ask staff a question. That's not inappropriate at this stage, is it? Councillor Hemmens.
Great, thank you. Listening to the arguments of my fellow councillors, I'm curious, if we open up the zoning and allow supervised consumption sites to go anywhere where medical or dental offices are, what would or could that engagement process look like? Do we simply say to the city, this is coming, tell us if you want it or don't want it? Like, I have a really hard time conceptualizing what that would look like in any meaningful way.
Your Worship, I think first of all, it would be important to recognize that regardless if council picks option A or B, you're talking about amendment to your zoning bylaw, which will require a public hearing. So both of those will go through a public process of notification. People can come to that public hearing and speak to specific amendments, whether it's option A or B. So unless directed otherwise by council to do additional consultation, that's the process we would follow.
I think I probably missed my opportunity to ask Dr. Hasselbach what that would look like, and thanks, I'm still undecided.
Well, I'm not going to lapse into some lengthy summing up tonight. I really wish that the next federal election would address this issue in a very serious way around the whole issue of addiction in this country, particularly around drugs. I would love to have the national debate around legalization, decriminalization of all substances. Not that I'm not choosing sides in the debate, but I just think we're way past the time it needs to be discussed and faced openly. Everyone around this room tonight is conscious of the issues that flow from addiction and where those substances are obtained and how they're obtained and the criminal behavior that arises from it, which is the source of all the things, the many emails and comments we receive from the public. We're not going to make a substantive difference here, candidly, whether we vote for option 1 or option 2 around that great national debate, which is probably not going to occur. Nor are we going to solve the issues around the criminal behavior associated with it, nor all issues around homelessness and housing. It's why I enthusiastically look forward to hopefully the recommendations from the Housing and Homelessness Task Force, which Councillors Bonner and Hemmens are co-chairing, and the work of that to try and both talk about solutions, coordinate hopefully the various and numerous parties who are involved in all of this, that we might actually have some what I will call local solutions that will advance the cause of public health, but also provide some comfort to the thousands of people in this community who don't feel comfortable going to their parks, who don't feel comfortable going to public facilities, and because of all of the issues that they see as dangerous to them and their families. This is a public safety issue in many respects, and the perceptions are what count. The truth doesn't matter. Mr. Harrison's here tonight, and has been pointed out. And if I accept absolutely what Dr. Hasselback had to say, that none of the individuals who are seen to create public disorder or cause problems are in fact the people who are going into and using the facilities of the existing site, so be it. But that's not what the public perceives. And Councillor Hemmens, whose heartfelt comments we've heard tonight around how the public feels and what they react to this public disorder, is real for those people. That's what they feel. However, we have a recommendation from staff around this motion. I accept the work that they have undertaken. I am hopeful that this will be seen as a step forward. Am I prepared to take the political heat that previous councils have taken around the decision when it comes before us? That's what we got elected to do, friends. And all of you, and I'm going to sound like the old man here tonight, as I said to each and every one of you and all the assembled audience on the night we were sworn in, November 5th, my precious daughter's birthday, you're never going to be as popular again for the next 4 years as you are tonight. And we are embarking on a road that I'm sure will use up a lot of political capital, as is to be expected when you seek public office. That is the joy and the honor of it. I am going to vote in favor of the motion. I see it as a step forward. It will not satisfy everyone, but it also recognizes, as Councillor Hemmens has pointed out tonight, that the public expects their opportunity to be heard. And I'm satisfied also about what I've heard from staff tonight, that ultimately, if a senior level of government wishes to allow for a supervised consumption service in our community, they can and will do so. And it may be politically difficult, but so be it. All I'm really voting for tonight, by supporting this motion, is saying that I want a formal opportunity for the citizens of this community who elected me their mayor to have their say. I may well disagree with that say. I may well be courageous, I may be a chicken. We won't know until it happens. But I'm voting for the opportunity for them to have their say and then let the chips fall where they may when we're actually presented with the issue. I'm happy to hear from anyone else. Otherwise, I'm going to call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion? Contrary? We have a tie, Ms. Gurry.
Your Worship, that means the motion is defeated.
Exactly. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I would like to move that, staff bring forward proposed changes to the City of Nanaimo zoning bylaw 2019 number 4500 to repeal the definition of drug addiction treatment facility and bring forward proposed changes to City of Nanaimo zoning bylaw 2011 number 4500 to revise the definition of office medical dental with citing provisions completed in consultation with Island Health.
That is alternative 2, essentially.
With an addition.
With an addition. Is there a seconder? Councillor Turley. Discussion. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I'll speak to that quickly. Obviously, that is was put forward as an option. I think we all understand what that means, but I do think that there is an opportunity for the public to be heard through that process. It's the same opportunity as option 1, and that is the public hearing process through the zoning amendment, and then any additional consultation that would be completed for the actuals of the site. I do think it's important that siting provisions are developed so that we can make sure that some sensitive locations aren't impacted by this. And I think that's where, through the development of those siting criteria with Island Health and with the city, we have a say in that process, just like we have a guiding policy for something such as retail cannabis. To me, this seems like the process that would sort of shoot that gap. It does allow for citizen input through a variety of ways that it doesn't necessarily play out in a very divisive one evening in council chambers. And it also allows us to hopefully move forward on this issue. And to me, that's where the courage comes in. We need to move forward on this issue. Just proceeding as is, kicking the can down the line isn't going to solve the problem. I'm not saying that this is going to solve the problem, but at least it's trying to move forward in the right direction.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to staff, just to be clear, if we go through and bring forward the proposed changes to the City of Nanaimo bylaw zoning to revise the definition of office medical dental, would that require a public hearing?
That's correct.
Excellent. So if we went through that process, there would be a public hearing on the zoning amendment that would give the opportunity for the public to come and have their say on these proposed changes, which I think is very important to all of council to have that type of engagement. And then on top of that engagement, we've heard very clearly from Dr. Hasselback that the process put forward of citing this supervised consumption site would then have another whole public consultation process that needs to meet the standards set by the federal government to actually put this in. So that's two opportunities to have public engagement and consultation. In addition, this is the process that Victoria, Vancouver, Kelowna, and Surrey have had in place, and they've moved forward this process, and in doing so have created a safer community for those who are the most vulnerable who are actually dying. I must remind council that over 100 people have died of opioid overdoses over the last 5 years. Am I not correct?
No, there's more.
More. And it is long time overdue to have one of these sites in the community that's permanent to provide these services, regardless of the other effects of potential some localized public disorder, which is going to happen regardless whether we have this here or not. And those issues of public disorder are only going to be dealt with once opioids are made available medically, so people do not have to engage in crime on them. And so I don't see any negatives towards going through this path in terms of having public consultation and to finally get something done that we've struggled to get done in a long time. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. First, a question to staff. If this goes forward, there will be a public hearing which will inform the public and allow them to speak to us changing this zoning bylaw, not to a specific, this is happening in your neighborhood. The process that Councillor Gesselbach outlines, the federal process, could very well look like that, where they go to a neighborhood, but the city's ability to say, actually, we're not supportive of this, that's what we're risking here, right? So there is a federal process in place, and I agree. I mean, we need to trust, I think, the federal process, but at the end of the day, we don't have any recourse if our community says absolutely not, but the federal process can move forward. I'm seeing you shake your head in the affirmative. And I just want to, just to speak from experience, folks are not dying typically in facilities of overdoses. Folks are dying at home, alone. So yes, this is a much needed service, and I'm the first person to say that, but this is not going to stem the flow of the opioid epidemic. So, thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. I'll be in support of the motion, especially with the addition that Councillor Brown has put forward. Trust is a kind of a two-way street. Yes, we should be trusting the other levels of government to do the right things, but they also have to trust us that we are doing the right thing as well. And I'm not really liking the idea of opening up the entire medical dental zone, but I am more in favor of picking areas within that zone that could be. And I think that to do this trust thing, I think that Island Health and the other agents, other government levels need to work with us on this to come up with a good solution that works for everyone. Because there's health issues with people who are overdosing on drugs, but there's also health issues with the people who watch this on a daily basis and the people who see it in our parks. And I do really want a solution to this. And I want all the organizations out there to work together. And I'm hoping that our decisions tonight and the ability of the public to engage us and with this public hearing that will probably come up to make those decisions and help us make those decisions. So I'll be voting in favor. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner, pardon me. Councillor, one dropped. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to speak against this motion for the same reasons that I spoke in favor of the earlier motion, which was defeated. And I'm looking at the wording in our staff report, and just for the benefit of those watching or listening at home, the alternate wording for zoning in this scenario, which is being proposed, Island Health or any applicant would be able to apply for a federal exemption for a supervised consumption site wherever medical offices are allowed. This would apply to most commercial and mixed-use zones throughout the city. In this case, council would not be able to attach conditions of approval, but would rely on the community consultation process, which we then are told Health Canada requires that efforts be made to engage with the community, and that those could take several options, including surveys, canvassing, and so on. I know it's an issue of trust, and I appreciate that, and I don't want to seem distrustful, but I think the citizens of this community need to trust this council to do what it can to protect their best interests, not the interests of one group of citizens who may suffer serious health challenges, but the safety of our communities. And I still feel strongly that we need to retain site-specific control over those applications. So I cannot support this blanket application of changing definition to allow for consumption sites as a medical office. Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I also echo the words of Councillor Thorpe, and I think what everybody else is forgetting about, it doesn't just have to be Island Health that makes an application. It can be Joe Blow from the street. So you're making an assumption that it is only going to be the health authority. Anybody can apply for Section 56. So that means we open the door to anybody that may want to do that, that may not have the same integrity as they do, that will not do the public consultation and say they do. So I'm very concerned about that. So for that reason, that's another issue I have. I also know that from conversations I've had that Vancouver and Surrey aren't working as well as you hear. So I have a lot of concerns around that. So again, I still think I was elected to represent the citizens of the city, and one way to do that is by the public hearing process. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Brown. You're going to have to turn yourself on.
Thank you, Your Worship. Quick point of clarification. The wording as proposed, it would not be a blanket office in medical dental. I think staff in Island Health would work together to develop a criteria that could be codified in the zoning bylaw to alleviate most concerns around where these sites would be located. And that decision would come back before this council to prove that criteria, be out there for the public to have their say on that criteria through the public hearing process.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I was actually going to ask Councillor Brown to repeat his addition to the recommendation, and that one. So what I understand is being proposed is that staff and Island Health will work together to look at possibly areas where these supervised consumption sites can be applied for. That appeases me. I feel very strongly that this will be the work of the Health and Housing Task Force, and it's appropriately laid there. And so if this passes tonight, then I very much look forward to having that conversation at that table.
Councillor Armstrong.
I just need to say this again, like, we're only dealing with Island Health. What about all the other applicants that do this? This motion only addresses Island Health. It's not addressing, like, when we had New Leaf here that could apply, or a doctor that can apply. So I think we're making an assumption that Island Health would be the only one. We've heard from other concerned citizens that they would like to do that, and that's where my concern comes in. This whole motion is streamlined towards Island Health, but it could have farther reaching effects than just Island Health. And I think we have to be very cognizant of that, because when you talk about we'll work with Dr. Hasselbeck, well, who are we going to work with on the other groups if they apply? So that, I mean, are we going to develop policies for each different type of person, or is there going to be one set of policies? So I just can't support the motion as is. Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. I think that the bar that would be set by the federal government in terms of ensuring that a proposal put forward would meet the standards, would meet the appropriate criteria. And I think everybody at this table takes public safety incredibly seriously. And I think that the option 2, really what's going to allow for the success of any type of safe consumption site is the degree of collaboration that does occur in terms of citing the location and all the different agencies that will be responsible for the success of the location to be involved in that process to ensure, and as Councillor Hemmens articulated, that is what the hopes for our committee on health and housing will take care of. And I think that we need to set a path forward for collaboration, and I do see option 2 as the best way forward to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to ask Councillor Brown to read that again for me.
But that council directs staff to bring forward proposed changes to City of Nanaimo zoning bylaw 2011 number 4500 to repeal the definition of drug addiction treatment facility and bring forward proposed changes to the City of Nanaimo zoning bylaw 2011 number 4500 to revise the definition of office, medical, dental with citing requirements developed in consultation with Island Health.
No further discussion? All those in favor of the motion? Contrary? Motion is carried.
Your Worship, could you note those opposed, please?
Yes. Councillors Thorpe, Mayor Krogh, Councillor Armstrong. Bylaw status sheet. It's for information only, Ms. Gurry. We have 2 pieces of correspondence. One is from the Office of the Ombudsperson regarding the quarterly report, and the second from the Regional District of Nanaimo, graciously offering to partner in hosting the 2020 Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities Convention.
Thank you, Worship. If there's any business arising from these correspondence, items of correspondence, such as council wishing to proceed with the partnership with the Regional District of Nanaimo in co-hosting the AVICC, a motion in that regard would be great.
No, I'm not going to make the motion, Your Worship. I don't think that would be appropriate.
I'm on your list.
Councillor Turley will.
Assuming there's cash that comes along with it.
I'm not committing to anything.
So the motion is to accept the offer of the Regional District of Nanaimo to partner in hosting the 2020 Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities Convention. Correct? That's the simple wording?
That's correct, Your Worship.
And is there a seconder? Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. This is no time to make jokes about Trojan horses. Any discussion? All those in favor? The offer graciously accepted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have no notices of motion?
Yes,
no
Your
other...
Worship, yes, we do. We have a notice of motion that Councillor Bonner is going to read.
Yes, of course.
So there's the
How
process.
could I forget you at this late hour?
Councillor Bonner.
So yes, Councillor Bonner is just going to read out his notice of motion, and it will be considered at the next regular council meeting.
Thank you, Your Worship. My notice of motion is that staff send a letter to all property owners of commercial properties along all bus routes in the City of Nanaimo, reminding the owners of the following. Bylaw 5000, Section 321, titled Trees Over Highway, which reads, every person being the owner or occupier of real property shall cause all trees, shrubs, or other vegetation to be properly trimmed and cut back so as to prevent physical obstruction or visibility impairment to pedestrian and vehicle traffic on sidewalks or highways. and bylaw 5000, Part 3, removal of vehicles, chattels, snow, signs, and rubbish, Section 22.1, titled Removal of Snow, Ice, or Rubbish, which reads, owners or occupiers of real property shall remove snow, ice, or rubbish from the sidewalk and footpaths bordering the property owned or occupied by them within 24 hours of the accumulation of such snow, ice, or rubbish on such sidewalk, and that both bylaws will be strictly enforced by ticketing without warning starting September 1st, 2019.
Thank you very much. Any other business? Question period?
Thank you, Worship. There were no questions related to the agenda items this evening, and the one name that is on here is no longer in the audience.
Never have I been more grateful for your comments. Motion for adjournment?
Your Worship, I'm not sure if you're proceeding back in camera this evening, and if so, you would recess this meeting to proceed back in camera, and then...
No, we are not proceeding back in
Okay,
camera.
I just
There's
wanted
no
to be
necessity,
sure.
But thank you, and I appreciate your thoughtful interjection here to ensure that we weren't doing anything stupid, and never be shy about doing so, but thank you. No need for in camera tonight. Motion to adjourn. Sorry, Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you very much.